The freight wagon rattled into Red Hollow just after sunset on November 9th, 1887, carrying a woman who'd learned to stop expecting anything good from strangers. Evelyn Mercer was 34 years old, though the lines around her eyes suggested someone older. She wore a plain gray traveling dress that had seen too many roads, a wool coat with patches sewn over patches, and boots held together more by stubbornness than leather. Her hair, dark brown streaked with premature gray, hung in a loose braid down her back. She wasn't beautiful, wasn't particularly strong, wasn't the kind of person you'd remember seeing. That was exactly how she wanted it. The wagon driver, a grizzled freight hauler named Cortez, who'd picked her up 2 days outside Kansas City, pulled the horses to a stop near the town's only boarding house. He spat tobacco juice into the mud. "This is it, ma'am. Red Hollow, or what's left of it." Evelyn climbed down slowly, her body stiff from days of rattling over frozen ruts. She looked at the town with the practiced assessment of someone who'd seen dozens just like it. Wooden buildings leaning against each other like drunks, streets churned into frozen mud by wagon wheels and livestock, smoke rising from chimneys in thin gray threads that disappeared into a sky the color of old pewter. A dying place. She'd expected that. "How much do I owe you?" she asked. Cortez shook his head. "You already paid back in Topeka, remember? With that venison stew you made when my gut was acting up." He studied her with an expression somewhere between pity and respect. "You planning to stay here long?" "1 night, maybe 2. Ain't much work for women in Red Hollow. Town's been dying since the mine collapsed last spring. Most folk with sense already left. I'm just passing through." That was the truth when she said it. Cortez nodded slowly. "Well, you take care of yourself, Mrs. Mercer. And if you need a ride out, I come through every 3 weeks hauling supplies to the camps up north. I'll remember that." She watched the wagon roll away into the gathering dusk, then turned to study the boarding house. It looked about as welcoming as a coffin. Through the dirty window, she could see a handful of men sitting around a table, drinking and playing cards with the grim determination of people trying to forget where they were. The cold bit through her coat. Winter was coming early this year. She'd felt it building for weeks as she traveled west. The kind of winter that killed cattle, froze rivers solid, and reminded frontier settlers that nature didn't give a damn about human plans. She picked up her bag, a canvas sack containing 1 change of clothes, a cracked iron skillet, a small bag of cornmeal, 3 potatoes, and a paring knife wrapped in cloth, and walked toward the boarding house. She made it 5 steps before she saw them. Children. 3 of them, huddled against the side wall of an abandoned building across the street. Even in the failing light, she could see they wore coats too thin for November. No gloves, no scarves. The oldest looked maybe 10. The youngest couldn't have been more than 6. They were watching her. Not with hope, not with expectation, with the flat, calculating stare of young animals deciding whether she represented food or danger. Evelyn stopped walking. The professional thing, the smart thing, would be to keep moving. Every town had hungry children. Every frontier settlement had orphans. You couldn't save them all. Hell, you usually couldn't save any of them. The best you could do was survive yourself and not look too closely at the things that would break your heart if you let them. She'd told herself that same thing in a dozen different towns. But something about the way the smallest child was shivering made her think of another little girl in another lifetime. And before she could stop herself, she was walking toward them instead of away. "Evening," she said quietly. The children tensed. The oldest, a girl with tangled blonde hair and a face smudged with dirt, moved slightly in front of the younger 2. "We ain't begging," the girl said quickly. Her voice carried that particular hardness children develop when adults have hurt them too many times. "We're just resting." "I can see that." Evelyn set her bag down slowly, making sure they could see her hands. "Cold night to be resting outside, though." "We got a place." "I'm sure you do." Evelyn studied them carefully. The smallest child, a boy with enormous dark eyes, had his hands tucked into his armpits for warmth. His lips had a faint blue tinge. "When's the last time you ate?" The blonde girl's expression didn't change. "We ate." "When?" "Today." "What did you eat?" No answer. Evelyn nodded slowly. She recognized the dance, the careful lies children told to keep adults from asking too many questions, making too many reports, dragging them into systems that usually made things worse instead of better. I'm about to cook some supper for myself, she said. Got some potatoes and cornmeal, more than I can eat alone. If you wanted to sit near my fire for warmth while I'm cooking, I wouldn't mind the company. The children exchanged glances. The girl's jaw tightened. What do you want? Straight to the point. Evelyn appreciated that. Nothing. I just don't like eating alone. And I don't like seeing children turn blue from cold. But it's your choice. I'll be behind the boarding house if you decide to come by. She picked up her bag and walked away before they could answer. Behind the boarding house, she found what she was looking for, a sheltered spot near the back wall where someone had left a stack of broken crates. She gathered the wood, built a small fire using dried grass as tinder, and set her skillet over the flames. While it heated, she sliced the potatoes thin and mixed the cornmeal with water from her canteen to make a rough batter. The smell of frying potatoes carried through the cold air. She waited. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. She was starting to think they wouldn't come when she heard the crunch of footsteps on frozen mud. All 3 children appeared at the edge of the firelight, hovering like nervous deer. Sit down if you want, Evelyn said without looking up. Fire's warm enough for all of us. They sat. Not close, keeping a careful distance, positioning themselves for a quick escape if needed. But they sat. Evelyn kept cooking. She fried the potatoes until they were crispy at the edges, then used the same grease to fry thin cakes from the cornmeal batter. The food was simple, probably not enough, but it was hot and it was real. She divided everything into 4 portions using a flat piece of wood as a plate, then held out the first portion to the blonde girl. Here. The girl stared at the food like it might disappear if she looked away. Take it, Evelyn said gently, before it gets cold. The girl took the food with both hands, moving so quickly her fingers trembled. The younger children received theirs with the same desperate urgency, and within seconds all 3 were eating so fast they barely chewed. Evelyn ate her own portion slowly, watching them from the corner of her eye. The smallest boy burned his mouth on a hot potato and kept eating anyway, tears running down his cheeks from pain or hunger or relief, probably all 3. When the food was gone, the children sat very still, like they weren't sure what happened next. What are your names? Evelyn asked. Silence. Then the blonde girl spoke quietly. I'm Elsie. This is my brother Thomas. That's Ruth. She ain't related, but she's been with us since summer. Evelyn nodded. I'm Evelyn Mercer. Most people just call me Mercer. You passing through? Elsie asked. The question was careful, like she was trying not to sound too interested in the answer. That was the plan. Was? Evelyn looked at the 3 small faces illuminated by firelight, at their too thin wrists and hollow cheeks, at the way they sat tensed and ready to run, even though they'd just been fed. How many more of you are there? She asked instead of answering. Elsie's expression closed immediately. What do you mean? I mean children, alone, in Red Hollow. How many? Why? Because I'm trying to figure out if one woman with 3 potatoes and some cornmeal can make any damn difference at all. The bluntness seemed to surprise Elsie. Her eyes narrowed. There's more, she said finally. We don't all stay together. It's safer that way. Harder for the town council to round us up if we scatter. Round you up? They tried sending us to the labor camps last summer. Said orphans were a drain on resources. Some kids got taken. The rest of us learned to hide better. Evelyn felt something cold settle in her stomach that had nothing to do with the winter air. How many? She asked again. Elsie hesitated. Then, maybe 15. Maybe more. Kids drift in and out. Some die. Some run off. Hard to keep count. Where are your parents? Dead. Most everybody is dead or gone. Fever came through in spring, killed a lot of folk. Then the mine collapsed in June and killed more. Town's been falling apart since then. Elsie's voice was flat, reciting facts without emotion. The ones left don't want to feed kids that ain't theirs, says there's not enough for everybody. And the law? Elsie laughed, a bitter sound too old for her years. Sheriff works for the mayor. Mayor wants us gone. Says hungry children make the town look bad to investors. Thomas, who hadn't spoken yet, suddenly grabbed Elsie's arm and pointed. 2 men had appeared around the corner of the boarding house. Both wore deputy badges. Both carried lanterns. Both looked like they enjoyed their work a little too much. There you are, one of them called out. He was tall and thick around the middle, with a beard that hadn't been trimmed in months. We've been looking for you, Elsie. Mayor wants a word. Elsie was on her feet instantly, yanking Thomas up with her. Ruth scrambled backward so fast she nearly fell into the fire. We didn't do nothing, Elsie said. Nobody said you did. Just come along nice and quiet. We don't have to go nowhere with you. The deputy's smile didn't reach his eyes. Actually, you do. Town's got laws about vagrancy. Children without proper supervision are supposed to be placed in the care of the municipal authorities. He said the words like he'd memorized them from a poster. That means you come with us. The hell they do, Evelyn said. Both deputies turned to look at her like they'd forgotten she was there. Who the hell are you? The bearded one asked. Evelyn stood slowly, brushing ash from her skirt. I'm the proper supervision. These children are with me. That right? The deputy looked skeptical. You their mother? I'm their guardian. Since when? Since right now. The deputy exchanged glances with his partner, a younger man with nervous eyes who kept shifting his weight from foot to foot. Listen, lady, I don't know who you are or what you think you're doing, but these kids are known troublemakers. The mayor has standing orders to bring them in whenever we find them. For what? Sitting by a fire? For their own protection. Their protection. Evelyn let the words hang in the cold air. That why they're all half-starved and dressed in rags? Because the town's protecting them so well? The bearded deputy's expression hardened. What happens to orphans ain't your concern. I'm making it my concern. You got papers, legal guardianship documents? Not yet. Then you got no authority here. Kids, come on. Don't make this difficult. Elsie grabbed Thomas and backed toward the shadows, but the younger deputy moved to block her path. That's when Evelyn did something completely irrational. She stepped between the deputies and the children. They're not going anywhere, she said quietly. The bearded deputy stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Lady, you really want to interfere with official town business? Because that's a good way to spend the night in a cell yourself. Then I guess you'll have to arrest me too. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then the bearded deputy shook his head in disgust. You know what? Fine, keep the brats. But when they steal something or burn down a building, don't come crying to us. And don't expect any help from this town, because you just made yourself real unpopular real fast. He turned and walked away, his partner following with one last nervous glance backward. When they were gone, Evelyn let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. You didn't have to do that, Elsie said quietly behind her. Evelyn turned around. All three children were staring at her with expressions somewhere between confusion and cautious hope. Yeah, Evelyn said. I really did. Why? It was the same question Elsie had asked earlier, but this time it carried a different weight. Why did you feed us? Why did you protect us? Why did you risk making enemies in a town where you don't know anybody? Evelyn thought about her answer carefully. Because I had a daughter once, she said finally. About your age, Thomas. She died of fever 5 years ago in Kansas City, and every time I see a hungry child, I think about how many times she must have been hungry before she died, and how many adults must have walked right past her without stopping. She looked at each of them in turn. So when I see children who need help, I stop, even when it's stupid, even when it makes my life harder, because maybe somebody else will do the same thing the next time, and maybe we can stop building a world where children starve while adults look the other way. Silence. Then Ruth, who hadn't spoken at all until that moment, whispered, Are you staying? Evelyn looked at the tiny girl with enormous eyes and a coat held together by hope. She thought about the boarding house bed she'd planned to sleep in tonight. She thought about moving on in the morning like she'd intended. She thought about the 15 or more children scattered through Red Hollow's shadows, hiding from deputies and starving slowly while the town pretended not to notice. She thought about her daughter's grave in Kansas City and the promise she'd made over that small stone marker. Yeah, she heard herself say. I think I'm staying. And just like that, Evelyn Mercer stopped running from her past and started building something that would nearly get her killed. Pocket. The next morning, Evelyn woke up stiff and freezing in what turned out to be an abandoned supply shed near the rail yard. After the deputies left the previous night, Elsie had led her to the shed, apparently one of several places the children used for shelter when they needed to disappear from the main streets. It was barely weatherproof, with gaps between the wall boards wide enough to see through and a roof that leaked in 3 places. But it was better than sleeping outside, and more importantly, it was a place the town authorities generally ignored. She'd slept on the floor wrapped in her coat, using her canvas bag as a pillow. It was the worst night's sleep she'd had in months, which was saying something. She sat up slowly, her back protesting every movement, and assessed her new home. The shed was maybe 12 feet by 15 feet. The previous occupants had left behind some broken crates, a stack of warped boards, and what looked like the remains of a workbench. There was a small iron stove in the corner, rusted but potentially functional, and a single window so dirty it barely let in light. It was, objectively, a terrible place to live. It was also exactly what she needed. Evelyn stood, brushed dust and wood chips from her skirt, and walked outside. The morning was bitter cold, the kind that made your lungs ache when you breathed too deeply. Frost covered everything in a thin white crust. The sun was rising somewhere behind thick clouds that promised snow. She could see the main street of Red Hollow from here, or what passed for a main street. A few early risers were already moving around. A man leading a mule toward the livery stable, a woman carrying water buckets, someone chopping wood behind one of the larger buildings. Nobody looked in her direction. She was about to go back inside when she noticed something near the shed's back corner, a pile of objects that hadn't been there last night. She walked over carefully and crouched down. Someone had left supplies. Not much. A small sack of beans, half a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth, 2 turnips, and a jar of what looked like rendered fat. There was also a dented tin cup and a folded piece of paper. Evelyn unfolded the paper. The handwriting was careful but unpracticed. "There's more kids than I told you, maybe 20. Most are at the old tannery past the church. Wyatt Boone looks after them. He's 13 and mean as a snake, but he keeps the little ones safe. Tell him Elsie sent you. Don't trust any adults except maybe Doc Ferris, and he's half drunk most days. Thank you for the food. E." Evelyn read the note twice, then folded it carefully and put it in her pocket. 20 children, not 15. 20. She picked up the supplies and carried them inside the shed. If she was going to do this, and apparently she was, despite every rational thought screaming that this was insane, she needed to approach it systematically. She couldn't just cook random meals and hope for the best. She needed a plan. She needed supplies. She needed to understand the situation she was walking into. And first, she needed to understand exactly who was in charge of this dying town and why they were so determined to let children starve. She spent the next hour making the shed marginally more habitable. She cleaned the stove, discovering it was functional beneath the rust. She organized the space, moving the workbench to create a clear area for cooking. She took inventory of what she had: 1 cracked skillet, 1 small pot, 1 paring knife, enough cornmeal for maybe 3 more meals, the supplies Elsie had left, her sewing kit, and exactly $4.30 in coins. It wasn't enough. Not even close. But Evelyn had worked miracles with less before. During the war years, she'd fed her family for weeks on nothing but ingenuity and stubborn determination. During the famine camps in Missouri, she'd kept 20 people alive by knowing which plants were edible and which stream water was safe to drink. She could do this. She had to do this. Because if she walked away now, those children would still be huddled in an abandoned tannery, slowly starving while adults walked past pretending not to see them. Evelyn put on her coat and headed toward the main street. Time to meet Red Hollow properly. Bit bacham. The town looked even worse in daylight. Most of the buildings were in disrepair, with broken windows covered by boards and roofs patched with whatever materials were available. Several structures had been abandoned completely, their doors hanging open to reveal empty interiors where rats and weather had done their work. The few businesses still operating clung to survival by their fingernails: a general store, a saloon, a livery stable, a boarding house, and what appeared to be a combination barbershop and doctor's office. Evelyn walked slowly down the center of the street, noting everything. The way people glanced at her and then quickly looked away. The hostile stares from 2 men sitting outside the saloon, the woman who pulled her child close and hurried inside a building when Evelyn passed. Word had traveled fast. She was already marked as trouble. Good, Evelyn thought grimly. Let them think that. Let them know she wasn't going to quietly disappear. She stopped at the general store. a sagging building with a faded sign that read Grant and Sons Mercantile. Inside, the store was dimly lit and smelled of sawdust, kerosene, and desperation. Shelves lined the walls, but most were only partially stocked. What goods remained were covered in dust, like they'd been sitting there for months. A man stood behind the counter, late 40s, balding, with suspicious eyes that tracked her movement from the moment she entered. "Help you?" he asked, though his tone suggested he'd prefer if she left. "I need supplies," Evelyn said. "Flour, beans, salt, lard if you have it, whatever vegetables you can spare." The man's eyes narrowed. "You're the woman who caused trouble with my deputies last night." "Your deputies?" "I'm Mayor Silas Grant. I own this store. I also run this town." He said it like someone reminding a dog who held the leash. "My men said you interfered with official business. Your men tried to arrest children for sitting by a fire. Those children are a problem. They steal. They beg. They make this town look like we can't take care of our own." "Maybe you can't." Grant's face flushed. "Now you listen here. No, you listen." Evelyn walked closer to the counter, her voice quiet and dangerous. "I don't care about your town politics. I don't care about your reputation. I care about the fact that 20 children are starving while you've got a store full of food. That food is for paying customers. Then I'm buying. How much for 50 pounds of flour?" Grant's smile was unpleasant. $3 a bag. Evelyn blinked. "That's twice the going rate in Kansas City." "Then buy it in Kansas City. Here, prices are what I say they are." He leaned forward. "And before you ask, I don't give credit to strangers, especially strangers who show up causing trouble their first night in town." Evelyn stared at him, understanding clicking into place. This wasn't just about children. This was about power. Grant controlled the food supply. He controlled the prices. He controlled who got to eat and who didn't. And orphans with no money and no family were just obstacles to his authority. "I'll pay your price," she said quietly. 1 bag of flour, 5 pounds of beans, salt, whatever vegetables are cheapest." Grant named a total that would leave her with less than $1. Evelyn counted out the coins slowly, placing each one on the counter with deliberate care. The mayor bagged her supplies with the satisfied expression of a man who'd just won a small but important victory. "One more thing," he said as she turned to leave. "Those children you're so concerned about? They're scheduled for transport to the territorial labor camps in 2 weeks. Council voted on it last month. So I'd save your money if I were you. They won't be your problem much longer." Evelyn stopped in the doorway. "They're not going anywhere," she said without turning around. "That's not your decision to make. Watch me." She walked out before he could respond, carrying her supplies in a fury so cold it burned. But Kim. She found the old tannery an hour later, following directions from a sullen boy hauling water, who grudgingly pointed her past the church ruins. The building looked like it should have collapsed years ago. Half the roof was gone, the walls were rotting, and the smell of old leather and chemicals still lingered in the air like a ghost. It was also completely silent. Too silent. Evelyn approached carefully, her instincts screaming that something was wrong. "Hello," she called. "My name is Evelyn Mercer. Elsie sent me." Nothing. She stepped through the broken doorway into the dark interior. At first she thought the building was empty. Then she saw them. Children. Everywhere. Huddled in corners, pressed against walls, hiding behind broken equipment. More than 20. Maybe 30. All of them silent, staring at her with the same flat, evaluating expression she'd seen on Elsie's face. And standing in front of them all, holding a rusted revolver pointed directly at her chest, was a boy who couldn't be older than 13. "Don't move," he said. His voice was steady, but his hands shook slightly, making the gun barrel waver. Evelyn froze, her hands raised slowly. "You're Wyatt Boone," she said calmly. "How do you know that?" "Elsie told me. She said you look after the children here." "Elsie talks too much." His jaw tightened. "Who are you, really?" "Just a woman who's good at stretching soup and doesn't like seeing children starve." "That why you got food in that bag?" "Yes." "Put it down. Slow." Evelyn lowered the bag to the ground carefully, then raised her hands again. Wyatt gestured to one of the older children, a girl about 11 with short dark hair. She darted forward, grabbed the bag, and retreated quickly to examine the contents. Flour, she reported. Beans, salt, some turnips. That everything? Yes. Wyatt's eyes never left Evelyn's face. Why? Why what? Why are you here? What do you want? Evelyn looked at him carefully. He was tall for his age, all sharp angles and nervous energy. His clothes were patched beyond repair. His face was harder than any 13-year-old should be. But beneath the hostility, she could see something else. Exhaustion. Fear. The crushing weight of trying to keep too many people alive when you're barely more than a child yourself. She knew that feeling. I want to help, she said simply. Nobody helps. Not for free. I am. Why? The question came out almost angry. What do you get out of it? Nothing, except maybe knowing I did something that mattered. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. They stared at each other while the children watched in tense silence. Finally, Wyatt lowered the gun slowly. His shoulders sagged with relief or disappointment, maybe both. I don't trust you, he said flatly. That's smart. Don't trust me until I've earned it. How do I know you're not working for Grent, trying to find out where we hide so his deputies can round us up? You don't. But if I was working for Grent, I wouldn't have bought food with my last $4 and walked out here alone to give it to you. That seemed to register. Wyatt looked at the supplies, then back at Evelyn. What do you want us to do? He asked warily. Come to my shed tonight, all of you. I'll cook everything I have and we'll figure out the rest tomorrow. Just like that? Just like that. Wyatt shook his head slowly. Lady, I don't know if you're crazy or stupid, but either way you're going to get hurt. This town doesn't want us. The mayor's been trying to get rid of us for months. The deputies beat up kids who get caught stealing. The ranchers shoot first if they see us near their property. And you think you can just cook soup and make it better? No, Evelyn said honestly. I think I can cook soup and keep you alive one more day. And then I'll do it again the next day, and the next. And we'll see how far that gets us. That's a terrible plan. You got a better one? Silence. Then Wyatt said quietly, When? Sunset. Behind the rail yard. There's a shed. You can't miss it. If this is a trap, it's not. If it is, I'll kill you myself. Evelyn looked at the rusted revolver and the terrified boy holding it and thought about all the ways children got destroyed by a world that couldn't be bothered to protect them. Fair enough, she said. Deep. They came at sunset, moving through the shadows like ghosts. Evelyn had spent the afternoon preparing everything she could. She'd cleaned the shed, repaired the stove's chimney with scavenged metal, and built a proper fire pit outside using stones from a collapsed wall. She'd soaked the beans, peeled the turnips, and mixed the flour with water and salt to make a simple dough. It wasn't much, but it was hot, and it was real, and it was more than most of these children had eaten in days. They arrived in small groups, cautious and quiet. Some came alone. Others traveled in pairs or trios. They kept their distance at first, watching from the edges of the firelight like wild animals drawn to warmth but afraid of the trap. Evelyn ignored them and kept cooking. She fried the turnips in rendered fat until they were soft, then added the beans and enough water to make a thin stew. While that simmered, she shaped the dough into flat cakes and cooked them directly on the hot stones around the fire. The smell of food brought them closer, slowly, carefully, until finally they were all sitting in a rough circle around the fire, 27 children ranging from age 3 to 15, all watching her with the same desperate hope they were trying hard to hide. Evelyn counted them twice. 27. Not 20. Not 15. 27 children that this town had decided weren't worth saving. She served them one at a time, using tin plates and cups she'd borrowed from a pile of discarded equipment near the rail yard. The portions were small. There wasn't enough food to fill anyone completely, but everyone got something. They ate in silence. When the food was gone, nobody left. They sat there in the firelight, warmer than they'd been in weeks, with full stomachs for the first time in days, and for the first time Evelyn saw the truth of what Wyatt Boone had been carrying. These weren't just abandoned children. They were a family, broken, scared, held together by nothing but stubbornness and the desperate need to survive. But a family nonetheless. Wyatt sat slightly apart from the others, still watching her with suspicion, the rusted revolver tucked into his belt. "Thank you," he said finally. The words came out stiff, like he wasn't used to saying them. "Don't thank me yet. This was easy. Keeping everyone fed for the next 3 months is going to be the hard part." "Why 3 months?" "Because that's how long until spring. If we can make it to spring, we can plant gardens, hunt fresh game, survive on our own." She looked around at all of them. "But winter's coming hard this year, I can feel it, and we're going to need more than flour and beans to get through it." "We hunt," one of the older boys said. He was maybe 14, with red hair and a scar across his cheek. "We know how to trap rabbits, shoot birds." "Good, we'll need that." "What about scavenging? Who knows which buildings have supplies left?" Several hands went up. "And who can repair things? Sew clothes, fix tools, that sort of work?" More hands. Evelyn nodded slowly. "All right, here's what I'm thinking. This shed is going to be our base, as everyone who wants to can stay here. There's not much room, but it's better than the tannery. We pool everything we find, we share every meal, and we figure out how to survive the winter together." "What do you get out of it?" Wyatt asked again. Evelyn met his eyes. "A reason to stop running," she said honestly. That first night, 17 children slept in the shed. They packed in tight, sharing the few blankets they had, using each other for warmth. It was crowded and uncomfortable, and the wind still whistled through the gaps in the walls. But it was warmer than the tannery, and for the first time in longer than most of them could remember, they fell asleep knowing there would be breakfast in the morning. Evelyn sat by the dying fire outside, wrapped in her coat, watching the stars appear through breaks in the clouds. She thought about her daughter, about her husband, dead 3 years now from infection after the railroad accident, about all the ways her life had fallen apart and left her wandering from town to town with nothing but cooking skills and a grief that never quite healed. She thought about the 27 children sleeping in that shed and the impossible task she'd just committed herself to, feeding them through winter, protecting them from a town that wanted them gone, keeping them alive when every rational calculation said it was impossible. She should have kept moving, should have taken Cortez's freight wagon the next time it came through, should have preserved what little she had instead of giving it away to children who might not even survive the season. But as she sat there in the cold November darkness, watching smoke rise from the shed's chimney and hearing the quiet sounds of children finally sleeping peacefully, Evelyn Mercer realized something important. For the first time since Kansas City, she didn't want to run. She wanted to fight. And she was about to discover that Red Hollow wasn't going to let her do that without paying a price that nearly killed her. The first real snow came 3 days later, and with it, the realization that feeding 27 children through a frontier winter was going to require more than good intentions and cooking skills. Evelyn woke before dawn on the 4th morning to find frost coating the inside of the shed walls, and 2 of the smallest children shivering despite being wrapped in every spare piece of fabric they owned. She built up the fire and made what she called breakfast, hot water with a handful of cornmeal stirred in and a pinch of salt. It was thin enough to see through and tasted like desperation, but it was warm and the children drank it without complaint. They were learning not to complain about anything. That worried her more than she wanted to admit. After the meal, Wyatt pulled her aside near the door. His face was tight with concern. "We're going to run out," he said quietly. "You know that, right?" "I know." "So what's the plan?" Evelyn looked at him, this boy who'd been forced to become a man too early, who carried responsibility like a physical weight on his thin shoulders. She wanted to tell him she had everything figured out, that she knew exactly how they'd survive, that he could stop worrying because an adult was handling things now. But she'd learned years ago that children who'd been lied to enough times could smell bullshit from a mile away. "The plan is we figure it out one day at a time," she said honestly. "Today I'm going to see what work I can find in town. Maybe someone needs sewing done or cooking or cleaning, anything that pays. They won't hire you. Grant's already spreading word that anyone who helps you is making an enemy of the town council. Then I'll find work somewhere else. The ranch is outside town, the camp's up north, somewhere." She studied his face. "You've been keeping these kids alive for months, Wyatt. How?" He shrugged uncomfortably. "We hunt what we can. Trap rabbits, shoot birds when we get lucky. We take jobs nobody else wants, mucking stables, hauling trash, stuff like that. And sometimes," he trailed off. "Sometimes you steal," Evelyn finished. Only from people who got plenty, and only food, never money or valuables. His jaw set defensively. We do what we have to. I'm not judging. I'm trying to understand what resources we have. She thought for a moment. How many of the older kids can hunt? 4 of us are decent shots. 6 more know how to set snares and traps. And the rest? The little ones we keep hidden. The middle ones do whatever work they can find. Elsie's good with herbs and medicine. She helps Doc Ferris sometimes when he's sober enough to need an assistant. Thomas can fix almost anything mechanical. Ruth, he smiled slightly. Ruth's job is to look pitiful when we need sympathy. Despite everything, Evelyn almost laughed. So we've got hunters, workers, a medic, a mechanic, and a professional sad face. That's about it. Then here's what we do. The hunters keep hunting. I want fresh meat every day if possible. The workers keep working, but bring every coin back here. I'll handle the cooking and organizing, and we start planning for the long term. What's long term? Gardens in spring, chickens if we can manage it, maybe some goats. We build something sustainable so next winter we're not scrambling like this. Wyatt stared at her. You're talking like we're staying here, like this is permanent. Isn't it? I don't know. I never thought past next week. Evelyn understood that. When you were hungry enough, time collapsed into the immediate. The next meal. The next day. The next moment of safety before everything fell apart again. We'll start thinking past next week, she said, because I didn't come this far to watch you all die in February. Something shifted in Wyatt's expression. Not quite trust, not quite hope, but maybe the beginning of belief that things could be different. There's something else, he said. The town council meeting is tonight. They're voting on the labor camp transport. Grant's trying to push it through early because of the winter supply problems. Early? You said it wasn't scheduled for 2 weeks. He moved it up. I heard his deputies talking yesterday when they were looking for Annie and Marcus. He paused. If they vote yes, marshals come within 3 days to collect us. They'll search every building in Red Hollow. Evelyn felt ice in her stomach that had nothing to do with the temperature. Then we make sure they vote no. How? I don't know yet, but I've got until tonight to figure it out. She grabbed her coat and headed toward town before Wyatt could point out how insane that sounded. The main street was more active than she'd seen it, with people hurrying through the cold, carrying supplies and looking worried. Evelyn stopped a woman struggling with a basket of laundry. What's happening? The woman glanced at her nervously. Storm's coming. Big one, according to the men who came in from the northern camps. Could be the worst in 20 years. She lowered her voice. You're the one feeding those children, aren't you? Yes. You should leave, before the council meeting. Grant's planning something and it won't be good for you. What's he planning? I don't know, but I heard him telling the deputies to be ready for trouble tonight. The woman shifted her basket. I'm sorry about the kids, I really am. But most of us got our own to worry about, and if Grant says there's not enough food for everybody... She trailed off, but Evelyn heard the rest clearly enough. Better some children starve than all of us go hungry. Thank you for the warning, Evelyn said quietly. She continued down the street toward the general store, forming a plan that was probably going to get her thrown out of town or worse. The store was busier than before, with several people loading supplies onto wagons. Grant stood behind the counter directing his sons, 2 sullen young men in their 20s who looked like they enjoyed their father's authority a little too much. Evelyn waited until the other customers left, then approached the counter. Grant's expression soured immediately. I've got nothing to say to you. That's fine. I've got plenty to say to you. She kept her voice level and cold. I want to buy supplies. 50 pounds of flour, 20 pounds of beans, salt, sugar if you have it, dried meat, and whatever vegetables are left. Can't sell to you. Council voted yesterday. No credit or sales to anyone supporting those orphans. I'm not asking for credit. I'm paying cash. Don't have cash, do you? Saw you spend your last coins 3 days ago. I'll have it by tomorrow. Grant laughed, a mean sound. Unless you're planning to rob somebody, you won't have money tomorrow or any day. Nobody in Red Hollow is going to hire you, and I made sure the ranches know your trouble. He leaned forward. You made your choice when you interfered with my deputies. Now you can starve with those brats, or you can leave on the next freight wagon. Those are your options. There's a third option, Evelyn said quietly. What's that? I go to that council meeting tonight and tell everyone what you've really been doing with the territorial supply shipments. The smile dropped from Grant's face. What the hell are you talking about? I worked supply routes for the Kansas City Railroad for 3 years. I know how to read shipping manifests. And I know the territorial government sent 6 emergency supply wagons to Red Hollow between March and September, food specifically allocated for families affected by the mine collapse and fever outbreak. She watched his expression carefully. But I've seen your inventory. You don't have enough supplies to account for 6 wagon loads. So where'd it all go? Grant's face had gone pale. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Because I'm thinking maybe you sold those supplies to the mining camps up north at a profit. Kept the money. Let the town starve while you got rich off government relief funds. She tilted her head. That's called theft of federal property. Marshals take that pretty seriously. For a long moment, Grant just stared at her. Then his expression hardened into something ugly. You've got no proof. I've got shipping records in my bag back at the shed. Found them in the old rail office when I was looking for wood to burn. Funny thing about railroads, they keep copies of everything. That was a complete lie. She had no records, no proof, nothing but a hunch based on math that didn't add up. But Grant didn't know that. Get out of my store, he said finally. I'll leave, but know this. If that vote happens tonight, and those children get sent away, those records go to the territorial marshal's office in the next freight wagon. She turned toward the door. Or you could sell me supplies at fair prices, cancel the vote, and we never have this conversation again. That's blackmail. That's survival. You choose. She walked out before he could respond, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack a rib. That was either the smartest or stupidest thing she'd ever done. She'd know which by tonight. Back at the shed, the children had scattered to their various tasks. The hunters were checking traps. The workers had gone looking for day labor. The younger children were huddled inside trying to stay warm. Evelyn found Elsie tending to a little boy with a nasty cough. How is he? Elsie looked up, her face worried. Not good. This cold's getting into his lungs. He needs medicine and warm food and probably a real bed in a real house. She shook her head. We got none of those things. Evelyn crouched beside the boy. She thought his name was Daniel, maybe 7 years old. His breathing was rough and wheezy. His skin felt hot despite the cold air. Can you get medicine from Doc Ferris? Maybe. If he's sober. If he's feeling generous. If he hasn't already heard about Grant blacklisting us. Elsie's voice was bitter. That's a lot of ifs. Try anyway. Tell him I'll pay whatever he wants. With what? I'll figure it out. Elsie gave her a look that said she was starting to doubt Evelyn's grasp on reality, but she stood and pulled on her thin coat. I'll go now before it gets darker. But, Miss Mercer, she hesitated. We can't keep doing this. Can't keep hoping and praying things work out. We need an actual plan. I know. Do you? Because it seems like you're just making stuff up as you go, and that's fine when it's just you, but there's 27 of us counting on you now. Her voice cracked slightly. We've survived this long because we were careful, because we didn't trust nobody and we didn't take stupid risks. But you got us all in one place now, depending on food we don't have and protection you can't guarantee. If Grant's men come tonight, they won't. You don't know that. You're right. I don't. Evelyn met her eyes. But I know that scattering and hiding and stealing scraps is just slow starvation. It's dying by inches instead of all at once. At least this way we're fighting. Fighting gets you killed faster. Sometimes, but sometimes it's the only way to survive. Elsie stared at her for a long moment, then walked out without another word. Evelyn sat beside Daniel, listening to his labored breathing and wondering if Elsie was right. Maybe she was being reckless. Maybe gathering all the children together was making them easier targets instead of safer. Maybe she was leading them toward disaster instead of salvation. But scattering them again felt like admitting defeat, and Evelyn had spent 5 years running from one defeat after another. She was tired of running, tired of losing, tired of watching people suffer because nobody wanted to take a risk. If she was going to fail, at least she'd fail trying. The afternoon dragged by with agonizing slowness. Evelyn used the last of the flour to make thin bread, stretching it as far as she could. The hunters returned with 2 rabbits and a handful of wild onions. She made a stew that fed everyone one small bowl each. It wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. As the sun started setting, Wyatt came to find her. Council meeting starts in an hour. You still planning to go? Yes. Want company? She looked at him, this fierce, frightened boy pretending to be brave. No. If this goes wrong, I need you here keeping everyone safe. And if they arrest you? Then you take the children and scatter. Hide until it's safe. Survive. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket, the note Elsie had written days ago. There's a freight hauler named Cortez who comes through every 3 weeks. If I don't come back, get word to him. He'll help you get somewhere safer. Wyatt took the paper reluctantly. This is a bad plan. Probably. You're going to get hurt. Maybe. So why are you doing it? Evelyn thought about that question, about her daughter's grave in Kansas City, about all the children she'd watched die in the famine camps because nobody cared enough to help, about the weight of all those small ghosts she carried everywhere she went. Because somebody has to, she said finally, and I'm tired of being the person who walks away. She left before he could argue, walking toward the church where the council meetings were held. The building was packed with townspeople, more than she'd expected. Apparently word had spread about tonight's vote. She slipped in through the back and stood against the wall where she could see everything. The council sat at a long table at the front. Mayor Grant, 3 merchants, 2 ranchers, and a woman Evelyn didn't recognize. All of them looked grim and uncomfortable, like they'd rather be anywhere else. Grant called the meeting to order, going through routine business first, repairs to the town well, allocation of firewood, discussion about the incoming storm. Then he got to the main issue. Last item, he said, his voice carrying through the silent room. The matter of the orphan children. As most of you know, we've had an ongoing problem with vagrant youth in Red Hollow. No families, no supervision. They steal, they beg, they create unsanitary conditions. The territorial government has offered to transport them to labor camps where they can be properly cared for and trained in useful skills. You mean work to death? Someone muttered behind Evelyn. Grant ignored that. The original transport was scheduled for 2 weeks from now, but given the approaching storm and the strain on our winter supplies, I'm proposing we move the date up to 3 days from now. This will free up resources we desperately need and remove a significant burden from the town. They're children, not a burden, a voice called out. Evelyn was surprised to see it was the woman from the laundry, the one who'd warned her earlier. Grant's jaw tightened. They're orphans with no means of support and no future in Red Hollow. The labor camps will give them food, shelter, and training. That's more than they have now. The camps are death traps, another voice said, an old man Evelyn didn't know. My nephew got sent to one last year, worked 16 hours a day, died of pneumonia in 3 months. You're not helping these kids, Silas. You're killing them slow. That's an exaggeration. Is it? The old man stood. How many children went to those camps from other towns? How many came back? Silence. Evelyn decided it was time. She stepped forward, moving through the crowd until she stood in the center aisle where everyone could see her. I have something to say. Grant's face flushed with anger. You have no standing here. This is a closed council session. It's a public meeting in a public building. I have as much right to speak as anyone. She looked around at all the faces watching her. My name is Evelyn Mercer. I arrived in Red Hollow 5 days ago, and since then I've been feeding the children this town abandoned. Not because I'm a saint, not because I expect gratitude, but because watching children starve while adults argue about resources makes me sick. Nobody's starving, Grant started. Yes, they are. I've counted 27 children living in abandoned buildings with no regular meals, no warm clothes, no medical care. Some of them are sick. All of them are malnourished. And before you say there's not enough food to go around, let me ask you something, Mayor Grant. Where are the emergency supplies the territorial government sent between March and September? Grant's face went carefully blank. Those supplies were distributed to families in need. Really? Because I've talked to a lot of families, and nobody seems to have received much of anything. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket, blank except for her grocery list, but nobody else could see that. I've got shipping records that show 6 wagon loads of food, medical supplies, and winter gear arrived in Red Hollow over 6 months. Your store doesn't have inventory that matches those numbers, so where is it? The room erupted in angry muttering. One of the ranchers on the council leaned forward. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious question, and I think the people of Red Hollow deserve an answer before they vote to send children away to clear out resources that should have been available all along. Grant stood abruptly. This is outrageous. I don't have to answer to some vagrant woman who showed up last week. No, you have to answer to the territorial marshal. Evelyn kept her voice calm and clear. Because if those children get sent to labor camps tomorrow, I'm sending copies of these records to the marshal's office. And federal investigators will come asking the same questions I'm asking now. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then one of the merchants on the council, a nervous-looking man with thinning hair, said quietly, "Silas, maybe we should postpone the vote, just until we can get clarification about the supply situation." "There's nothing to clarify." "I'd also like to see those shipping records," one of the ranchers said. He was looking at Grant with open suspicion now. "If there's supplies unaccounted for, we need to know about it, especially with a bad storm coming." "This is ridiculous," Grant snapped. "She's bluffing. She doesn't have any records." "Then you've got nothing to worry about," Evelyn said. "Let investigators come look at your books. If everything's in order, I look like a fool and you can send me packing. But if I'm right..." She let that hang in the air. The other council members were exchanging glances now. The crowd was muttering louder. Someone in the back shouted, "Let's see the books!" Grant's face had gone from pale to flushed with rage. His hands clenched on the table edge. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth. "We'll postpone the vote 1 week, and then we're settling this properly, with or without your interference." 1 week? Evelyn agreed. She turned and walked out before anyone could see her hands shaking. Outside, the temperature had dropped even further. Snow was starting to fall in lazy spirals through the darkness. Evelyn leaned against the church wall, trying to catch her breath. She'd bought them time. 1 week. 7 days to find real proof, secure actual supplies, and figure out how to protect 27 children from a town that wanted them gone. It felt impossible, but she'd done impossible things before. She was halfway back to the shed when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find 2 men following her through the snow, Grant's sons, both of them big and mean-looking. "Our father wants a word," the older one said. "Tell your father I've said all I have to say." Wasn't a request. They moved to flank her, cutting off her escape routes. Evelyn's mind raced. She was alone on a dark street with 2 men who had every reason to want her hurt, or scared, or both. Screaming wouldn't help. She was too far from the shed for the children to hear, and nobody else in town would intervene. "Here's how this works," the older son said, stepping closer. "You leave Red Hollow tomorrow. Take the next freight wagon out. Stop interfering with council business. Stop making accusations. Disappear." "Or what?" "Or accidents happen. Sheds burn down, people get hurt, children disappear." He smiled. "Be a shame if those kids you're protecting ended up worse off because of you." Evelyn felt ice in her veins, but she kept her voice steady. "If anything happens to me or those children, the records I mentioned go to the marshals immediately. I've made arrangements." That was another lie. But it was a good one. The brothers exchanged glances, uncertain now. "You're bluffing," the younger one said, but he sounded less sure than his brother. "Try me." For a tense moment, nobody moved. Then the older brother spat in the snow near her feet. 1 week, he said. Then you're done, with or without those kids. They walked away, disappearing into the darkness. Evelyn waited until her legs stopped shaking, then continued toward the shed. When she arrived, she found all 27 children awake and waiting, crowded inside around the stove. They looked terrified. "Well?" Wyatt asked. "What happened?" Evelyn closed the door and leaned against it, suddenly exhausted. "We've got 1 week to prove Grant's a thief and find enough food to survive the winter." "That's impossible." "Probably, but we're doing it anyway." Elsie pushed forward. "I got medicine from Doc Ferris. He says Daniel needs to stay warm and drink lots of fluids. He also says..." She hesitated. "He says you should leave town before Grant kills you." "He's not the first person to say that today." "Maybe you should listen." Evelyn looked around at all the small faces watching her with that same mix of hope and fear she'd seen since the first night. "I'm not leaving," she said. "Not until every one of you is safe." "What if that never happens?" Thomas asked quietly, the first time she'd heard him speak. It was a fair question. Then I guess we'll keep trying until it does. That night, Evelyn lay awake listening to the wind howl outside and snow pile against the walls. The shed was warmer than it had been. The children's combined body heat helped, but it was still cold enough to see her breath. She thought about the week ahead, about finding proof against Grant that didn't exist, about securing supplies with no money, about protecting children from men who saw them as problems to be eliminated, about all the ways this could go wrong and end with people she cared about getting hurt or killed. She should have felt scared. Instead, she felt angry. Angry at a world where children had to fight for scraps while adults hoarded plenty. Angry at systems that treated the desperate as disposable. Angry at herself for walking past so many tragedies before finally deciding to stand and fight. But anger was useful. Anger kept you warm on cold nights. Anger made you stubborn enough to attempt impossible things. And right now, Evelyn needed all the anger she could find because the next 7 days were going to test every bit of courage, cleverness, and sheer bloody-minded determination she possessed. Outside, the storm that would nearly kill them all was building on the horizon. But she didn't know that yet. All she knew was that 27 children were depending on her, and she'd be damned if she let them down. The blizzard arrived 2 days later, 3 days ahead of schedule, like nature itself had decided Red Hollow hadn't suffered enough yet. Evelyn woke to absolute silence, the kind that meant snow was already piling deep enough to muffle everything. She pushed open the shed door and immediately understood why the northern camp workers had been terrified. Snow was falling so thick she couldn't see 10 feet in any direction. The wind screamed across the plains with a sound like something dying, driving ice crystals hard enough to sting exposed skin. This wasn't weather. This was a declaration that humans didn't belong here. She pulled the door shut quickly, her mind already racing through calculations that didn't add up. They had maybe 3 days of food left if she stretched it impossibly thin. The stove would eat through their firewood in 2 days at most, and they were about to be buried under snow that might not melt for weeks. Wyatt appeared beside her, his face tight with the same recognition. "How bad?" he asked quietly. "Bad enough that going outside might kill you. Bad enough that we can't hunt. Bad enough that we're trapped here until it passes. How long will it last?" "I don't know. 3 days? A week? Could be longer." Around them, children were waking up, disturbed by the howling wind and the cold that seemed to seep through every crack in the walls. Little Daniel was coughing worse than yesterday, despite Elsie's medicine. Ruth was shivering, even wrapped in 2 blankets. Thomas was stacking wood near the stove with mechanical precision, like staying busy could keep panic away. "We need to ration everything starting now," Evelyn said. "1 meal a day, water from melted snow, keep everyone inside and conserved." "1 meal won't be enough." "I know, but it's what we've got." She spent the morning making inventory while the storm raged outside. The results were worse than she'd feared. They had maybe 15 pounds of beans left, a bag of cornmeal half full, 3 potatoes, some wild onions the hunters had gathered, and that was it. The firewood stack that had seemed adequate yesterday now looked pitifully small. If the blizzard lasted more than 4 days, children were going to start dying. Elsie found her sitting by the stove doing math that refused to work. "What are we going to do?" the girl asked. "I'm figuring it out." That's not an answer. "It's the only one I have right now." Evelyn rubbed her face tiredly. "How's Daniel?" "Worse. The cold's making his chest worse. He needs real medicine, not just herbs and hope." Elsie's voice cracked. "He's 6 years old, Miss Mercer. He can't survive this." "Yes, he can. We all can." "How? You got some miracle hiding in your pocket?" Evelyn looked at the girl's angry, frightened face and made a decision she'd been avoiding since the night she arrived. "No miracle. But I've got one last option." "What option?" "Grant's storage barn, the one behind his store." Wyatt, who'd been listening nearby, went very still. "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. He's hoarding supplies in there, supplies that were supposed to be distributed to people who need them. Right now, we need them more than he does." "That's stealing," Elsie said. "That's survival. He stole first. From the government, from this town, from you. I'm just taking back what should have been yours all along." "They'll arrest you," Wyatt said flatly. "Or worse." "Maybe. But I'd rather take that risk than watch children freeze and starve when there's food 100 yards away." She looked at both of them. "I'm going tonight, after the town's asleep. The storm will cover tracks. Nobody will know until morning. I'm coming with you, Wyatt said immediately. No, you're not. Yes, I am. You don't know the town like I do. Don't know which buildings are watched, which alleys are safe, where the deputies patrol. His jaw set stubbornly. And you'll need help carrying stuff. 2 people can haul more than one. If we both get caught, then Elsie takes charge here. We've already talked about it. Evelyn looked between them and realized they'd been planning for this possibility, probably since the first night. These children had been preparing for adults to fail them, because adults always did. Fine, she said, but we do this smart. In and out fast. We take only what we can carry. And if anything goes wrong, we run different directions. Don't let them catch both of us. When do we go? 3 hours after dark. Give everyone time to settle in for the night. The day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Evelyn made one thin meal, bean soup stretched with melted snow, and the last of the cornmeal. The children ate in silence, hunched over their bowls trying to absorb every bit of warmth. Nobody asked for seconds because everyone understood there weren't any. After the meal, Evelyn pulled Elsie aside and gave her careful instructions about what to do if she and Wyatt didn't come back. The girl listened with a face like stone, writing nothing down because paper could be found and used as evidence. If we're not back by dawn, take everyone and scatter, Evelyn said. Use the emergency meeting spots Wyatt set up. Stay hidden until you're sure it's safe. And then what? Then you survive, however you have to. That's a shit plan. It's the only plan we've got. As darkness fell, the wind somehow got worse, hammering against the shed walls like it was trying to tear them apart. Snow was already drifted 3 feet deep against the door. The temperature inside had dropped so low that water left in cups froze solid within an hour. Evelyn layered on every piece of clothing she owned and wrapped cloth around her face to protect against frostbite. Wyatt did the same, moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd done dangerous things before. They left just after midnight, pushing through the door into a world that had become completely alien. The snow was waist-deep in places, wind driven into drifts that reached the roof lines. Visibility was maybe 5 feet. The cold was so intense it hurt to breathe. Wyatt grabbed her arm and pulled her close so she could hear him over the wind. Stay behind me. Step where I step. If you lose sight of me, stop moving immediately and wait. She nodded, already unable to feel her face. They pushed forward into the blizzard. Moving through the storm was like wading through a frozen river in complete darkness. The wind shoved them off course constantly. Snow found every gap in their clothing. Within minutes, Evelyn's feet were numb despite her boots. Her lungs burned with each breath of air so cold it felt like inhaling knives. But Wyatt moved with surprising confidence, navigating by landmarks only he could see. After what felt like hours but was probably 20 minutes, he pulled her behind a building and pointed. Through the swirling snow, she could just make out Grent's store and the large barn structure behind it. No lights anywhere. No movement. The whole town was shuttered against the storm. Storage barn's got a side door, Wyatt shouted over the wind. Lock's broken. Never got fixed after the mine collapse. We can get in there. How do you know that? Because I've already been inside 3 times. Of course he had. They moved quickly across the open space, exposed and vulnerable, praying nobody was watching from dark windows. Wyatt led her to a door barely visible under a snowdrift. He dug it clear with his hands, then pulled it open. The inside of the barn was dark and freezing, but at least the wind stopped. Evelyn stood still, letting her eyes adjust while Wyatt moved deeper inside. Here, he whispered. She followed his voice and found herself standing in front of stacks of supplies that made her want to scream. Sacks of flour piled to the ceiling, barrels of salt pork and smoked meat, bins of potatoes, turnips, dried apples, jars of preserves, bags of sugar, boxes of medical supplies. Enough food to feed every person in Red Hollow through the winter twice over, while children starved 100 yards away. That son of a bitch, Evelyn whispered. Told you. He's been hoarding this since spring while telling everyone there's shortages. Wyatt's voice shook with fury. People died because they believed him. Kids got sent away because he said there wasn't enough food. Not anymore. Evelyn grabbed an empty sack from a pile near the door. Fill this. Flour, beans, salt meat, whatever you can fit. Move fast. They worked quickly in the darkness, loading bags with supplies. Evelyn took flour and beans, knowing she could stretch those furthest. Wyatt grabbed salt pork and preserved vegetables. They each filled 2 bags, loading as much as they could physically carry. They were almost to the door when they heard voices outside. Both of them froze. The voices got closer, men talking, their words whipped away by wind, but the tone clear enough. Deputies on patrol despite the storm, probably checking buildings to make sure nothing had blown apart. "Hide," Wyatt breathed. They dove behind a stack of grain sacks just as the door opened. 2 deputies entered, bringing a blast of snow and wind with them. One carried a lantern that threw wild shadows across the supplies. "Christ, it's cold," one of them muttered. "Why are we checking buildings when nobody's stupid enough to be out in this?" "Because Grant's paranoid about his precious supplies, thinks that Mercer woman might try something." "In this storm? She'd have to be insane." "She's already insane, showing up at the council meeting, making accusations, protecting those worthless orphans." The deputy moved deeper into the barn, his lantern sweeping close to where they were hiding. "Grant wants her gone one way or another. Says after this storm passes, we deal with her permanent-like." "Kill her?" "Doesn't have to look like that. Accidents happen. People freeze in blizzards. Buildings burn down with folks inside." A mean laugh. "Real tragedy." Evelyn felt Wyatt tense beside her, his hand moving toward the rusted revolver tucked in his belt. She grabbed his wrist and squeezed hard. "Don't!" The deputies circled the barn slowly, checking shadows. The one with the lantern stopped maybe 5 feet from their hiding spot. "You hear something?" "Just the wind." Sounded like breathing. "Everything sounds like something in this storm. Come on, I'm freezing my balls off. Let's finish the rounds and get back inside." They started toward the door, then the deputy stopped, turned, looked directly at the stack of grain sacks hiding Evelyn and Wyatt. "What's that?" Evelyn's heart stopped. The deputy moved closer, raising his lantern. That's when something crashed loudly at the far end of the barn, the sound of wood splintering and metal clanging. Both deputies spun toward the noise. What the hell was that? Wind must have knocked something loose. Check it out. While both men hurried toward the back of the barn, Wyatt grabbed Evelyn's arm and pulled her toward the door. They moved fast but quiet, staying low, dragging their supply bags. Behind them, the deputies were arguing about whether the crash was wind or rats, or something worse. Evelyn and Wyatt slipped outside into the blizzard and ran. The storm was somehow worse than before, the wind hitting like fists, the snow so thick it was like running through solid white darkness. Evelyn's legs burned, her lungs screamed. The bags of supplies felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds each. But she didn't stop, couldn't stop, because behind them she heard shouting. The deputies had discovered the open door or missing supplies or both, and now they were raising the alarm. Wyatt grabbed her again and pulled her down a different route, away from the main streets, through alleys and between buildings. They were running blind now, trusting his memory of the town's layout. Once Evelyn slipped on ice and went down hard, the breath knocked from her lungs. Wyatt hauled her up and kept moving. They heard voices behind them, more men joining the search, spreading out through the storm. "This way," Wyatt gasped, pulling her toward what looked like a solid wall of snow. It was actually a drift, piled against an abandoned building. He dove into it, creating a tunnel, and Evelyn followed. They burrowed into the snow like animals, pulling the supply bags in after them. The snow closed around them, muffling everything. They lay there in the darkness, gasping for air, listening to men shouting somewhere nearby. "Check behind the livery. Split up, cover more ground." She can't have gone far in this storm. The voices gradually faded as the searchers moved past their hiding spot. Evelyn and Wyatt waited in the snow tunnel, sharing warmth and terror in equal measure. After what felt like forever, Wyatt whispered, "We need to move, before we freeze here." "Which way?" "I don't know anymore. Storm's got me turned around." For the first time, Evelyn heard fear in his voice. They were lost in a blizzard, being hunted by armed men with stolen supplies that proved they were thieves. If they guessed wrong, they'd either freeze to death or get caught. Neither option ended well. "Best guess," she said. "Which direction?" Wyatt was quiet for a moment, then, "That way, I think. Maybe." "Good enough." They crawled out of the snowdrift and started moving again. The trip back took twice as long as the trip out. They got lost 3 times, wandering in circles while the storm erased all landmarks. Once they nearly walked into a building's wall before seeing it. Once Evelyn was sure they'd somehow left town entirely and were headed out into the open plains where they'd die within the hour. But somehow, through luck or stubbornness or something else, they eventually saw a dark shape that might have been the shed. It was. They fell through the door into warmth and light and the immediate panic of children who'd thought they were dead. Elsie's face went from terrified to furious in an instant. 3 hours, she hissed. You were gone 3 hours. I thought... Her voice broke. I thought they'd killed you. Almost did, Wyatt managed through chattering teeth. We got lost in the storm. Did anyone see you? Deputies, they were searching. Might still be searching. Evelyn dropped the supply bags on the floor, her arms screaming with relief. But we got what we came for. The children crowded around the bags, their faces lighting up as they saw what was inside. Real food, enough to survive. We have to hide this, Elsie said immediately. If deputies search here and find stolen supplies, bury it outside in the snow, Thomas suggested. Mark the spot. They'll never find it. Smart. Wyatt was already rebagging the supplies into smaller portions. Everyone helps. Quick. They worked fast despite exhaustion, dividing the supplies and burying them in marked spots around the shed. They kept out only enough for tomorrow's meal, nothing that would look suspicious if someone searched. By the time they finished, Evelyn could barely move. Her body was shutting down from cold and exertion. She collapsed near the stove and let the heat soak into her frozen limbs. Wyatt sat beside her, his face white with exhaustion. That was the stupidest thing I've ever done, he said. Probably. We could have died out there. Yep. And if they'd caught us, we'd be in jail right now. Or worse. I know. He looked at her with an expression somewhere between admiration and disbelief. Are you always like this? Like what? Crazy, reckless, acting first and thinking maybe later. Evelyn thought about that, about the railroad accident that killed her husband because he'd cut a safety check to save time, about the fever that took her daughter because she'd waited too long to see a doctor, thinking it was just a cold, about all the times careful planning had failed and desperate action was the only thing left. Only when it matters, she said finally. The storm raged for 3 more days. 3 days trapped inside the shed with 27 children, rationing food and firewood, telling stories to pass time and keep panic at bay. 3 days of Daniel's cough getting worse despite medicine and care. 3 days of watching the younger children get quieter and more withdrawn as the cold seeped deeper into their bones. But they had food now, real food. Evelyn made soup thick with salt pork and vegetables. She baked bread that was dense and heavy, but actually filling. She boiled water with dried apples and sugar to make something that tasted almost like a treat. The children's faces slowly lost that hollow, desperate look, and Evelyn watched them and thought about the supplies still buried in the snow outside. Enough food to last until spring if they were careful. Enough to prove Grant was hoarding resources. Enough to maybe save all of them, if she lived long enough to use it. On the 4th day, the storm finally broke. Evelyn pushed open the shed door to find a world transformed into something alien and beautiful and terrifying. Snow had buried Red Hollow under drifts 10 feet deep in places. Buildings looked like they were half swallowed by white waves. The sky was clear and bright blue, the kind of cold clarity that hurt to look at. Nothing moved anywhere. The town looked abandoned. We need to dig out the supplies before someone else finds them, Wyatt said behind her, and we need to check the town, see what damage the storm did, figure out if anyone knows about the theft yet. You mean if they know it was us? That too. They spent the morning organizing. The hunters dug out the buried supplies and moved them inside to proper hiding spots. The workers helped clear snow from around the shed and create paths. Elsie tended to Daniel, whose cough had gotten worse overnight despite the improved food. Around noon, Evelyn made a decision. I'm going to check the town, see what's happening. That's stupid, Elsie said immediately. They're looking for you. Maybe, or maybe they're too busy dealing with storm damage to care about missing supplies right now. She pulled on her coat. Either way, we need information. I'll come with you, Thomas offered. No, if something happens, I need you here helping Elsie. She looked around at all the anxious faces. I'll be back by dark. If I'm not, you know what to do. She left before anyone could argue further. Red Hollow looked like a war zone. Several buildings had collapsed completely under the weight of snow. Others had lost roofs or walls. Livestock that hadn't been sheltered properly had frozen where they stood, creating eerie sculptures of ice-covered animals. People moved through the streets slowly, digging out doorways, checking damage, looking shell-shocked. Nobody paid attention to Evelyn. They were too busy trying to survive. She made her way carefully toward the general store, staying to side streets, watching for deputies. The store was open, but barely. One window had blown in during the storm. Snow had drifted inside, covering merchandise. Grant stood behind the counter looking like he'd aged 10 years in 4 days. Evelyn almost walked past. Then she noticed something. People were arguing with him. She moved closer, ducking into a doorway where she could hear without being seen. "Don't care what you say, Silas. We know you got supplies back there." It was one of the ranchers, a big man with a red face and ice in his beard. "My family's been rationing for weeks while you sit on warehouses full of food. That's private property. That's government relief supplies, and you know it. Word's going around that someone raided your barn during the storm. Found enough food back there to feed the whole town. Where'd that come from if there's such terrible shortages?" Grant's face flushed. "I don't know what you're talking about. Bullshit. We're done playing games." The rancher leaned across the counter. "The marshal's coming through as soon as the road's clear. When he gets here, we're showing him everything. The supply records, the missing shipments, the barn full of food you've been hoarding, and then we'll see what the territorial government has to say about it. You can't prove anything. We'll let the law decide that." The rancher turned and stomped out, nearly running into Evelyn. He stopped, recognized her, and his expression softened slightly. "You're the one feeding those orphans." "Yes." "Heard you stood up to Grant at the council meeting, made accusations about stolen supplies." He studied her carefully. "You got proof of that?" Evelyn thought about the supplies buried around her shed, about the risks of admitting anything, about the possibility that this man might help or might turn her in. "I'm working on it," she said carefully. "Work faster, because when the marshal gets here, we're cleaning house in Red Hollow, and that means dealing with everyone who's been breaking laws, including people who steal, even if they steal from thieves." He paused. "Understand what I'm saying?" "I understand." "Good, because those kids you're protecting? Some of us have been trying to help for months, but Grant and his council blocked everything, made it impossible to act without getting run out of town ourselves." His voice was bitter. "So we stayed quiet and hated ourselves for it. But the storm changed things, showed us what matters, and it ain't protecting some corrupt mayor's pride." He walked away before Evelyn could respond. She stood in the cold street trying to process what she'd just learned. The town was turning against Grant. The marshal was coming, and she was holding stolen goods that proved she was a thief, even if what she'd stolen had been stolen first. There was no good way out of this. She could return the supplies and lose the food they desperately needed. She could hide them and risk arrest when the marshal arrived. Or she could do something so completely insane that it might actually work. She started walking back to the shed, a plan forming that would either save them all or destroy everything she'd built. When she arrived, she found chaos. Daniel had collapsed. Elsie was trying to keep him breathing while other children crowded around in panic. "What happened?" Evelyn demanded. "His lungs," Elsie gasped. "They're filling up. He can't get air. We need real medicine, a real doctor, something—" Daniel's lips were blue. His breathing came in horrible, wet gasps. His eyes were rolling back. He was dying, right there in front of them, and there was nothing any of them could do except watch it happen. Evelyn looked at his small face and thought about her daughter's last hours, about how she'd held her hand and whispered promises she couldn't keep, about the weight of watching a child die when you're supposed to be the one keeping them safe. Not again. Never again. "Wyatt, Thomas, come with me. Now." "Where? See, Grant's store. He's got medicine back there, real medicine." "They'll arrest you," Elsie said. "I don't care." Evelyn was already moving toward the door. "That boy is not dying today." She walked out into the frozen street with Wyatt and Thomas behind her, heading straight toward the one building in Red Hollow where she'd definitely be recognized and probably arrested. Behind her, she could hear Daniel's labored breathing. Ahead of her, she could see deputies starting to notice her approach, and all around her, the town of Red Hollow held its breath and waited to see which way this impossible woman would jump next. She was halfway across the main street when the first deputy spotted her. "That's her," he shouted. "That's the Mercer woman." Evelyn didn't slow down. She kept walking straight toward Grant's store with Wyatt and Thomas flanking her like an honor guard. Her boots crunched through the frozen snow. Her breath came out in white clouds. And somewhere behind her, a child was drowning in his own lungs while adults decided whether saving him was worth the inconvenience. Two more deputies appeared from between buildings, moving to block her path. One of them was the bearded man from her first night in town, the one who'd tried to arrest Elsie. He recognized her immediately, and his hand moved to the gun at his hip. "Stop right there." "No." Evelyn didn't break stride. "I said stop." He drew the gun, pointing it at her chest. "You're under arrest for theft of private property. A child is dying. I need medicine. After he's breathing again, you can arrest me all you want." "That ain't how this works." "Then shoot me." She kept walking. "But that medicine's going to help that boy either way, so you better be prepared to shoot all three of us." The deputy's gun wavered. He'd clearly expected her to stop, to argue, to give him time to figure out what to do next. He wasn't prepared for someone who simply refused to acknowledge his authority. Behind him, people were gathering. Word was spreading fast that something was happening. Evelyn could see faces appearing in windows, doors opening despite the cold. The deputy glanced around nervously, realizing he had an audience. "Last warning," he said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "Thomas," Evelyn said quietly. "How long does Daniel have?" "Minutes, maybe." His lips were already blue when we left. She looked at the deputy. "Every second you stand here pointing that gun is a second that child gets closer to dead. Now either shoot or get out of my way, because I don't have time for this." For a long, terrible moment, nobody moved. Then someone in the crowd spoke up, a woman Evelyn didn't recognize. "Let her through, Marty. It's just a sick kid." "She stole from the mayor's private stores," the deputy protested. "Yeah? Well, maybe the mayor shouldn't have been hoarding supplies while children starved." Another voice, this one male. "We all know what's in that barn now. Saw it ourselves when the door got left open during the storm. So either that woman stole from a thief, or she's telling the truth about what those supplies were meant for." More voices joined in, people emboldened by the crowd. "Let her get the medicine." "It's just a child, for Christ's sake. You really gonna shoot a woman over some cough syrup?" The deputy looked around wildly, realizing the mood was turning against him. He lowered the gun slowly. "This isn't over," he said. "I know." Evelyn walked past him without another glance. She pushed through the door of Grant's store with Wyatt and Thomas right behind her. The interior was chaos from the storm damage. Snow had melted into puddles across the floor. Broken glass littered the aisles. And standing behind the counter with murder in his eyes was Mayor Silas Grant himself. "Get out of my store," he said quietly. "I need medicine. Pneumonia remedy. Whatever you've got." "I'm not selling you anything. Ever." "Then I'm taking it." Evelyn started toward the back room where she knew the medical supplies were kept. Grant moved faster than she expected for a man his age. He grabbed a shotgun from beneath the counter and leveled it at her. "I said get out." Evelyn stopped. The store had gone completely silent. Through the window, she could see the crowd outside watching, pressing closer. "There's a 6-year-old boy dying right now," she said. "His name is Daniel. He likes songs about trains. He helps the other children even though he's one of the smallest. And he's drowning because his lungs are full of fluid, and I don't have medicine to help him." Her voice stayed level and cold. "So you can shoot me. But I'm walking to that back room and taking what I need. And then you can explain to everyone why you killed a woman for trying to save a child." "You stole from me, Jewel. You stole from everyone." Evelyn took a step forward. "Those supplies in your barn? They were government relief meant for this entire town. You hoarded them, sold them for profit, let people suffer while you got rich. So don't talk to me about theft when you're the biggest thief here. You can't prove that." "Actually, I can. Because when I broke into your barn during the storm, I found shipping manifests. Government documents showing exactly what was delivered and when, and I kept copies." Another lie, but she was getting good at those. "The marshal's coming, and when he arrives, he's going to see those documents and ask a lot of questions you don't want to answer." Grant's face had gone pale. The shotgun wavered slightly. "You're bluffing." "Try me." They stared at each other across the ruined store, while the crowd outside pressed against the windows, and Wyatt's hand moved slowly toward his hidden revolver, and Thomas picked up a piece of broken wood like he might actually use it. Then someone else spoke. "Put the gun down, Silas." Everyone turned. Standing in the doorway was the rancher Evelyn had talked to earlier, and he wasn't alone. 6 other men stood with him, all of them armed, all of them looking grim. "This doesn't concern you, Morrison," Grant said. "Yeah, it does. It concerns all of us." Morrison walked into the store slowly. "We've been talking, a lot of us, about the supplies, about the missing shipments, about how you've been running this town like your personal kingdom while people died." He gestured at Evelyn. "This woman shows up and does in 2 weeks what we should have done months ago. Stands up to you, protects those kids everyone else wanted to forget, makes us ashamed of ourselves." His voice hardened. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to give her whatever medicine she needs. Then you're going to open up that barn and distribute those supplies fairly to everyone who needs them. And you're going to do it without complaint or resistance. Understand? You can't, we can, and we are." Morrison looked at the other men. "Anyone disagrees?" Silence. Grant lowered the shotgun with shaking hands. His face was red with humiliation and rage. "The medicine's in the back," he said through gritted teeth. "Take what you need and get out." Evelyn didn't wait for him to change his mind. She hurried to the back room with Wyatt while Thomas kept watch. The medical supplies were exactly where she remembered from her previous visit, shelves full of bottles and packets that represented the difference between life and death. She grabbed everything she thought might help. Pneumonia remedy, fever reducers, cough syrup, willow bark extract. Her hands shook as she stuffed them into a bag. "We need to move fast," Wyatt whispered. "This could still go bad." "I know." They returned to the front to find Grant still standing behind the counter like a statue, the shotgun at his side, defeat written across his face. The crowd outside had grown larger. Morrison and his men stood between Evelyn and Grant like human shields. "Thank you," Evelyn said to Morrison. He nodded. "Don't thank me yet. This just bought you time, not safety. Grant's got friends in the territorial government. When the marshal comes, things might not go the way you hope. I'll deal with that when it happens. You got somewhere safe to keep those kids?" "Safe as anywhere." "It's not enough. Storm damage is bad. We lost 3 buildings completely. Doc Ferris's place got hit. Roof collapsed. He's working out of his house now, but it's cramped." Morrison hesitated. "There's an old church on the east side of town. Been abandoned for years, but the structure's solid. Stone walls, good roof. Could house a lot of people if it was cleaned up." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because some of us want to help. Should have helped sooner." He looked uncomfortable. "Can't change the past, but maybe we can do better going forward." Evelyn studied his face, looking for deception or hidden motives. She found only genuine regret and the kind of determination that comes from finally deciding to do the right thing. "I'll think about it," she said. She walked out of the store with the medicine clutched tight and Wyatt and Thomas behind her. The crowd parted silently as they passed. Nobody cheered. Nobody celebrated. But she could feel something shifting in the cold air. The town was watching her differently now. Not with hostility, not with pity, but with something that might eventually become respect. She ran the last 100 yards to the shed. Inside, Elsie was still bent over Daniel, trying to keep him breathing. The boy's lips were darker blue than before. His chest barely moved. Other children crowded around crying or frozen in helpless terror. "Move!" Evelyn commanded. She dropped beside Daniel and tore open the medicine bottles with shaking fingers. The pneumonia remedy was thick and dark, smelling like licorice and something chemical. She forced a spoonful between Daniel's lips, tilting his head back so he wouldn't choke. "Come on," she whispered. "Come on, kid. Swallow." Daniel's throat convulsed slightly. She gave him another spoonful, then another. Minutes passed like hours. The medicine slowly worked its way into his system. And then, finally, Daniel coughed. A real cough this time, not the weak wheezing from before. His chest heaved, and he coughed again, harder, and fluid came up dark and awful. But he was breathing, actually breathing. His color started returning slowly, the terrible blue fading from his lips. Elsie burst into tears. Several other children started crying too, this time from relief instead of fear. Evelyn sat back against the wall, her own hands shaking now that the crisis was past. She'd been so focused on getting the medicine that she hadn't let herself think about what would happen if she failed. If she'd been too late. If Daniel had died anyway despite everything. But he hadn't died. They'd won this battle, for today at least. Wyatt dropped beside her, his face gray with exhaustion. "That was insane," he said. "Probably. You walked up to an armed man and basically dared him to shoot you. It worked, didn't it? This time. Next time you might not be so lucky. Then I guess we better make sure there isn't a next time." But even as she said it, Evelyn knew that was wishful thinking. They'd humiliated Grant publicly, exposed his theft, turned part of the town against him. Men like that didn't forget. They waited for their moment, and then they struck back twice as hard. The attack came 3 nights later. Evelyn woke to the smell of smoke. For a confused moment, she thought someone had let the stove fire get too hot. Then she heard crackling and saw orange light flickering through the gaps in the wallboards. The shed was on fire. "Everyone up!" she screamed. "Fire! Get out now!" Children jerked awake in confusion and panic. Smoke was already filling the interior, thick and choking. Flames were spreading along the back wall where someone had piled kindling and oil-soaked rags against the exterior. This wasn't an accident. Someone had set this fire deliberately. "Out the door!" Wyatt was shouting, dragging smaller children toward the exit. "Don't stop for anything! Just run!" Evelyn grabbed Daniel and Ruth, one in each arm, and pushed through the smoke. The heat was already intense, singing her hair, burning her throat. Behind her, she heard wood cracking as support beams started to fail. They burst outside into freezing air and chaos. Children poured out of the shed screaming and coughing. Flames shot through the roof in great orange columns. And standing at the edge of the firelight, watching with satisfaction, were 3 men Evelyn recognized. Grant's sons and one of his deputy friends. "You!" Evelyn snarled. The oldest son smiled. "Told you there'd be consequences. Told you accidents happen. There's children in there. Not anymore. They're all out. We watched to make sure." His smile widened. "But now you got no shelter, no food. That's all burning up. No supplies. No protection. So here's what happens next. You and those brats leave Red Hollow by sunrise. Or next time we don't wait to make sure everyone's out first." Rage flooded through Evelyn so intense she actually started toward him. Wyatt grabbed her arm. "Don't. They want you to attack so they can claim self-defense." He was right. She knew he was right. But watching her shed burn while these men laughed made her want to commit violence in ways she'd never wanted before. Then she heard something that made her blood freeze. "Where's Thomas, Elsie's voice, sharp with panic. "Where's Thomas?" Everyone looked around. Thomas wasn't with them. "He was right behind me," one of the older boys said. "I saw him inside." "He went back," another child interrupted. "I saw him turn around. He was going for something." Evelyn didn't hear the rest. She was already running back toward the burning shed. "Thomas!" she screamed. The heat hit her like a wall. The interior was completely engulfed now, flames eating through everything. Smoke was so thick she couldn't see 3 feet ahead. "Thomas, where are you?" A cough answered from somewhere deep inside. Evelyn pulled her coat over her face and pushed forward. The floor was hot enough to burn through her boot soles. Burning debris fell around her. She could hear the roof groaning overhead, seconds from total collapse. "Thomas!" She found him near the back corner, trapped behind a fallen beam, clutching something to his chest. The supply bags. The idiot boy had gone back for the stolen supplies. "Leave them!" Evelyn shouted. "We need this food. We need you alive." She grabbed his arm and pulled hard. The beam had him pinned across the legs. She tried to lift it, but couldn't get leverage in the smoke and heat. Thomas pushed from his side, and together they managed to shift it enough for him to crawl free. They stumbled toward the door just as a major section of roof collapsed behind them, sending up a shower of sparks and embers. They made it outside seconds before the entire structure folded in on itself. Evelyn and Thomas collapsed in the snow 20 feet away, gasping and coughing, their clothes smoking. The shed was completely gone. Everything inside, supplies, blankets, cooking equipment, all of it, consumed in minutes. 27 children stood in the snow watching their home burn, and Grant's sons were nowhere to be seen, disappeared into the darkness like the cowards they were. Elsie dropped beside Thomas, checking him for injuries. His pants were burned through at the knees. His hands were blistered from the heat. But he was alive. "You stupid, stupid boy," Elsie said, crying and hitting his shoulder at the same time. "You could have died." "We needed the food," Thomas protested weakly. "We need you more than food." Wyatt appeared at Evelyn's side, his face illuminated by the dying flames. "Now what?" he asked quietly. It was a fair question. They had no shelter. Most of their supplies were gone. It was the middle of winter with temperatures well below freezing, and the men who'd just tried to burn them out would probably try again. Evelyn looked at all the small faces watching her, waiting for her to fix this somehow. She had no idea how to fix this, but she also wasn't going to let them freeze to death in the street. "The church," she said. Morrison mentioned an abandoned church on the east side of town. Stone building, solid roof. "That's breaking and entering," Wyatt pointed out. "Add it to my list of crimes." She struggled to her feet, her legs shaking. "Everyone grab what you can carry. We're moving. In the middle of the night? You want to stay here and wait for Grant's people to come back?" That settled it. They gathered what few possessions had been outside the shed when the fire started. Most of the children had nothing but the clothes they wore. The supply bags Thomas had saved were damaged but still contained some food. It wasn't much, but it was something. They walked through the frozen streets of Red Hollow like refugees, a ragged column of children following a woman who'd promised to protect them and was now leading them to break into a church. The building Morrison had mentioned was exactly where he'd said, a stone structure on the eastern edge of town, dark and silent and covered in snow. The front door was chained, but a side window had been broken at some point and never repaired. "Everyone inside," Evelyn ordered. They climbed through one by one, dropping into darkness. The interior was freezing and smelled of dust and old wood, but the walls were solid and the roof kept out the snow. There were broken pews scattered around and some kind of raised platform at the front. It was twice the size of the shed and felt like a palace in comparison. "Spread out," Evelyn said. "Find anything we can burn for warmth. Stay together. Don't wander off alone." The children moved through the darkness like experienced scavengers, which they were. Within minutes, they'd found broken furniture, old papers, even some ancient hymnals that would burn if needed. Wyatt built a fire in what had been the altar area, using stones to contain it. The flames cast wild shadows across the walls, making the church look haunted. Maybe it was. They huddled around the fire, sharing body heat and what little food they had. Nobody spoke much. Everyone was too exhausted and too scared about what came next. Evelyn did inventory in her head. They had maybe 2 days of food left. No real supplies, no legal shelter, no protection from men who'd already tried to burn them once, and a town that was slowly turning against Grant but might not turn fast enough to save them. She needed help, real help, the kind that came with authority and guns and the power to arrest people who set fire to buildings full of children. She needed the territorial marshal. "How long before the road's clear enough for wagons?" she asked Wyatt. "Few more days, maybe. Depends on the weather. So maybe a week before the marshal gets here. If he comes at all. If Grant hasn't already sent word making you out to be the problem." Evelyn hadn't thought of that. Of course, Grant would try to control the narrative. He'd tell the marshal about a vagrant woman causing trouble, stealing supplies, turning the town against its leadership. He'd make himself the victim and her the criminal. And he'd probably succeed. "Then we need proof," she said. "Real proof. Not just accusations. Something concrete that shows what he's been doing." "The supply manifests you mentioned," Elsie said. She'd been listening quietly while tending to Thomas's burned hands. "Do those actually exist?" "No, I lied about that." "So we've got nothing." "Not nothing. We've got the barn full of supplies that shouldn't exist if there were really shortages. We've got shipping records at the rail office that show deliveries. We've got townspeople who are starting to talk." Evelyn thought hard. "We need someone who keeps records, someone who'd have documentation of what came in and what got distributed." "The freight hauler," Wyatt said suddenly. "Cortez, he brings in most of the supplies from the territorial warehouses. He'd have manifests showing what he delivered." "Where is he now?" "Usually camps up north this time of year, but he comes through Red Hollow every few weeks." "When's he due back?" Wyatt calculated. "Could be any day now." Could be another week. We find him first. Get copies of his records. Then when the marshal arrives, we've got actual proof instead of just accusations. And if Cortez doesn't want to help, Elsie asked, then we figure out plan B. What's plan B? Evelyn looked around at the children huddled in a stolen church with almost no food and enemies who wanted them dead or gone. I have absolutely no idea, she admitted. For some reason, that made Wyatt laugh. You're terrible at this, he said. I know. We're probably all going to die. Probably. But we're still alive right now. That's something. That's everything. They spent the rest of the night taking turns keeping watch while others slept. The fire burned low but steady. The church stayed cold but tolerable. And outside, Red Hollow settled into an uneasy silence, broken only by wind and the occasional sound of snow sliding off roofs. Morning came gray and bitter. Evelyn woke to find Morrison standing in the church doorway. She was on her feet instantly, knife in hand, before she was fully conscious. Easy, Morrison said, hands raised. I'm not here to cause trouble. How'd you find us? Whole town knows where you are. Half of them are arguing about whether to drag you all out. Other half thinks Grant went too far burning your shelter. He looked around at the children slowly waking up. I brought supplies. Not much, but it'll help. He stepped aside and 3 other men came in carrying bags and bundles. Flour, beans, salt pork, blankets, firewood. Real help. Why? Evelyn asked. Because we're tired of being cowards. Morrison met her eyes. My daughter died in the fever outbreak last spring. She was 8 years old. And I watched her starve because I believed Grant when he said there wasn't enough food to go around. His voice cracked slightly. Then I saw what was in that barn. All that food that could have saved her. And I realized I'd let my own child die because I was too scared to question authority. I'm sorry, Evelyn said quietly. Don't be sorry. Be ready. He handed her a folded paper. That's a list of 12 families who want to help. We'll provide supplies, keep watch, make sure Grant's people don't try anything else. But you need to understand, we can't do this forever. The marshal comes in maybe a week. When he gets here, this all gets decided one way or another. We'll be ready. I hope so. Because Grant's not going to let this go. He's already talking about having you arrested the minute the marshal arrives. Claims you're the one who stole the supplies, burned your own shelter for sympathy, corrupted the children. Will the marshal believe him? Depends on who gets to him first with evidence. That's why you need documentation. Real records, not just testimony. I'm working on it. Morrison nodded slowly. I hope you know what you're doing, Mrs. Mercer, because you're gambling with a lot of lives here. I know. After Morrison left, they distributed the supplies and made plans. The older children would scout for Cortez, check the usual routes he traveled. Others would gather more information about Grant's operation, talk to people who might have seen shipments disappear. Elsie would tend to injuries and keep the younger ones occupied. And Evelyn would wait. Wait for the marshal. Wait for evidence. Wait for everything to either come together or fall spectacularly apart. 3 days passed in tense anticipation. The town was dividing into factions, those who supported Grant out of fear or loyalty or corruption, and those who'd finally decided enough was enough. Arguments broke out in the streets. 2 stores refused to sell to anyone helping the orphans. The saloon became Grant headquarters, where his supporters gathered to drink and plan. But more people brought supplies to the church. More families offered quiet support. The tide was turning, slowly, maybe too slowly. On the 4th morning, one of the scouts came running back with news. Marshal's coming, maybe 6 hours out, and he's got deputies with him. This was it, the moment everything would be decided. Evelyn gathered the children and gave them simple instructions. Stay together, stay quiet. Let me do the talking. And whatever happens, remember, you survived this long because you're strong and smart and braver than most adults I know. That doesn't change no matter what some marshal decides. What if he arrests you? Ruth asked, her small voice terrified. Then Wyatt's in charge. And you listen to him same as you'd listen to me. We're not letting them arrest you, Wyatt said flatly. Yes, you are. Because fighting armed marshals gets people killed, and I didn't keep you alive this long just to watch you throw your lives away. She softened her voice. Promise me. Wyatt looked mutinous but finally nodded. They waited. The marshal arrived just before noon with 3 deputies and a wagon. He was a tall man in his 50s with gray in his beard and eyes that missed nothing. He took one look at the church full of children, and his expression hardened. "Who's in charge here?" "I am," Evelyn said, stepping forward. "Evelyn Mercer." "You're the one who's been making accusations about Mayor Grant?" "Yes, sir." "You got proof?" "Working on it." "That's not an answer." Before Evelyn could respond, Morrison appeared with several other townspeople. "Marshal, we need to talk to you about some irregularities in supply distribution. I'll hear your concerns, but first I need to deal with this situation." He looked at Evelyn. "You're accused of theft, arson, trespassing, and corrupting minors. Mayor Grant's filed formal complaints, says you've been causing trouble since you arrived." "I've been feeding abandoned children. If that's causing trouble, then guilty as charged." "It's more complicated than that." "No, sir, it's actually very simple. This town abandoned 27 children, left them to starve and freeze. I fed them and protected them. Everything I did was because nobody else would. By stealing supplies. Supplies that were stolen first by Grant from the territorial government for his own profit." "You have evidence of that?" She does." Everyone turned. Standing at the church door was Cortez, the freight hauler. He walked in carrying a leather satchel stuffed with papers. "I've got 3 years of delivery manifests," he said. "Every shipment I brought to Red Hollow, every supply allocation from the territorial warehouse, and I've got records showing what Mayor Grant claimed he received versus what I actually delivered." He dropped the satchel at the marshal's feet. "The numbers don't match, by a lot." The marshal opened the satchel and pulled out papers. His expression grew darker as he read. "This shows massive discrepancies," he said slowly. "That's because Grant's been skimming supplies and selling them to mining camps for triple the price," Cortez said. "I couldn't prove it before. Didn't want to accuse a mayor without hard evidence. But Mrs. Mercer here forced the issue, and I'm done staying quiet." The marshal looked at Morrison. "You've seen Grant's storage barn?" "Yes, sir. It's full of government relief supplies that were supposedly distributed months ago." "Show me." An hour later, the marshal stood in Grant's barn surrounded by evidence that couldn't be denied or explained away. Mayor Silas Grant was arrested on the spot. So were both his sons, and the deputy who'd helped them burn the shed. The charges included theft of federal property, fraud, corruption, attempted murder, and about 6 other crimes the marshal listed off in a cold, precise voice that promised lengthy prison sentences. Evelyn watched them being loaded into the wagon in chains. Grant looked at her with pure hatred. "This isn't over," he said. "Yeah," Evelyn replied, it is." But even as the wagon rolled away carrying Red Hollow's corrupt leadership to face justice, Evelyn knew the real work was just beginning. 27 children still needed homes. Winter was still brutal and unforgiving, and she'd just burned every bridge she had with half the town to protect kids most people still saw as burdens. But they were alive, fed, safe. For today at least, and sometimes that's all you could ask for. The wagon carrying Grant and his sons disappeared down the frozen road, and Evelyn felt something unclench in her chest that she hadn't realized was there. But the relief lasted maybe 30 seconds before the reality of their situation came crashing back. The marshal turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Mercer, you understand you still committed theft, even if what you stole was already stolen property." "Yes, sir." "And technically you're squatting in this church without permission." "Yes, sir." "And you've got 27 children here with no legal guardianship, no proper housing, and winter's got at least 2 more months before it breaks." "I'm aware." He studied her for a long moment, then surprised her by almost smiling. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. Stupid guts, but guts." He looked around at the children watching from the church doorway. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm declaring the supplies in Grant's barn as recovered government property. They'll be distributed to Red Hollow residents based on need, which means a good portion goes to feeding these kids properly." "Thank you." "I'm not finished. The territorial government's going to want someone local to oversee the distribution, someone they can trust not to pull the same crap Grant did. Morrison here seems like he's got his head on straight, so I'm recommending him for temporary town administrator until proper elections can be held." Morrison looked startled. "I'm not qualified." You're honest, which is more than we can say for the last administration. You'll figure out the rest." The marshal turned back to Evelyn. As for you, I should probably arrest you for a half-dozen violations. But I've got a feeling that would cause more problems than it solves, and frankly, I don't have the energy for that kind of mess. So what happens to us? That depends on what Red Hollow decides. These kids need permanent homes, proper guardians, some kind of legal status. You can't just keep a commune of orphans living in a church indefinitely. He paused. The territorial government runs an orphan placement program out of Sterling City. I could arrange transport, get these children processed into proper foster situations. No. The word came out harder than Evelyn intended. No labor camps, no processing. These kids stay together and they stay here where people actually know their names. That's not really your decision to make. Then whose decision is it? Because these children have been making their own survival decisions for months while adults ignored them. I think they've earned the right to have a say in what happens next. The marshal looked like he wanted to argue, but Morrison spoke up first. What if we made it official? Establish something permanent here in Red Hollow. Like what? An orphanage. A real one, properly funded and legally recognized. We've got this church building, we've got recovered supplies, and we've got a whole town that's feeling pretty damn guilty about how they treated these kids. Morrison looked at Evelyn. If Mrs. Mercer's willing to run it, I'm willing to help organize community support. I'm not qualified to run an orphanage, Evelyn protested. You're not qualified to do half the things you've done since you got here, but that didn't stop you. Morrison's expression was wry. Besides, those kids trust you. That counts for more than any credential. The marshal looked skeptical. The territorial government would need to approve the establishment, inspect the facility, ensure proper standards are maintained. So we meet their standards. We do it right this time. Morrison's voice gained strength. Red Hollow failed these children once. Let us try to make it right. What followed was 3 hours of discussion involving the marshal, Morrison, several other town leaders, and eventually Evelyn herself. They talked about funding sources, legal requirements, building modifications, staffing needs, and about 50 other details that made Evelyn's head spin. But slowly, impossibly, a plan emerged. The church would be converted into a proper children's home. The territorial government would provide initial funding from the recovered relief supplies. Red Hollow would contribute labor and ongoing support. And Evelyn, despite having no formal qualifications beyond stubbornness and cooking skills, would be named the official administrator. There's one condition, the marshal said as the sun was setting. You've got 3 months to prove this can work. I'll be back in spring to inspect the operation. If those children aren't being properly cared for according to territorial standards, they get transferred to the Sterling City Placement Program. Understood? Understood, Evelyn said. After the marshal left, she stood outside the church watching the last light fade from the sky. 3 months to transform a broken church into a functioning home. 3 months to prove that damaged children and a woman with a traumatic past could build something worth saving. It felt impossible. But then again, surviving this long had felt impossible too. Wyatt found her standing there in the gathering darkness. So we're staying, he said. It wasn't quite a question. Looks like it. You going to be in charge? Apparently. He was quiet for a moment. I don't trust adults, you know that, right? They always promise things and then they leave or die or decide we're too much trouble. I know. But I trust you, don't know why. Maybe because you're just as messed up as the rest of us. He looked at her sideways. Are you going to leave? Once this gets hard or boring, or when you remember you had a life before Red Hollow? Evelyn thought about that question, about the years she'd spent drifting from town to town, running from memories of her daughter and her failed marriage and all the ways her life had collapsed, about how easy it would be to get on a freight wagon and disappear again. I'm not leaving, she said finally. I'm tired of running. And besides, someone's got to make sure you don't burn the place down. That was one time, and Thomas started that fire. Still counts. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching lights appear in windows across Red Hollow as families settled in for another cold night. What was her name? Wyatt asked quietly. Your daughter, the one who died. You never said her name. Evelyn felt the old familiar ache, but it didn't hurt quite as sharp as it used to. Sarah. Her name was Sarah. She would have been my age, wouldn't she? About that, yeah. Is that why you care about us? Because we remind you of her? No. I care about you because you're worth caring about. Sarah's got nothing to do with it. She looked at him. You think I'm trying to replace her with all of you? Are you? No, nothing replaces people you've lost. They're just gone, and you learn to carry the empty space they left behind. She paused, choosing her words carefully. But maybe you can fill that space with new things. New people. Not as replacements, just as proof that life keeps going even when you think it can't. Wyatt nodded slowly. My parents died in the mine collapse. My little sister died of fever 2 months later. For a long time I was just waiting to die too, because what was the point of being alive when everyone I loved was dead? His voice was matter of fact, like he was discussing the weather. Then the other kids started showing up. And I realized I couldn't die yet because they needed someone, even if that someone was just me. That's why you're good at this, taking care of people. I'm not good at it, I'm just stubborn. Same thing, sometimes. They went back inside where Elsie had organized the children into work groups. Some were cooking with the new supplies Morrison's people had brought. Others were sweeping and organizing the church space. The littlest ones were playing some game involving stacked cups and a lot of giggling. It looked like a home, not a perfect home, not a comfortable home, but a home nonetheless. The next 3 months were the hardest work of Evelyn's life. They started by making the church actually livable. Morrison organized work crews that repaired the broken windows, reinforced the roof, built a proper kitchen area in what had been the vestry. Other townspeople donated furniture, beds, tables, chairs, cooking equipment. Some of it was junk. Some of it was surprisingly generous. The children worked alongside the adults, learning construction and plumbing and basic carpentry. Thomas turned out to have an almost supernatural ability to fix broken things. Elsie organized a medical station where she could treat injuries and illnesses properly. Wyatt became the unofficial enforcer, making sure work got done and settling disputes before they escalated, and Evelyn did everything else. She cooked meals for 30 people 3 times a day. She negotiated with suppliers for food and materials. She settled arguments, wiped noses, bandaged scraped knees, and listened to nightmares at 3 in the morning. She wrote letters to the territorial government updating them on progress. She created schedules and rules and consequences for breaking those rules. She became, against all odds, the director of an actual orphanage. It wasn't smooth. There were fights, some verbal, some physical. 2 of the older boys tried to run away twice before finally accepting they didn't have anywhere better to go. Little Ruth cried herself to sleep for 2 weeks straight, grieving parents she barely remembered. Daniel's lungs stayed weak, requiring constant monitoring and expensive medicine. Money was always tight. The territorial funding covered basics but not extras, and there were always unexpected expenses. A broken water pipe, spoiled food that had to be replaced, a child needing urgent medical care. The town helped, but resentment still simmered in some quarters. There were people who thought the orphans were getting too much attention and resources, who whispered that Evelyn was building her own little kingdom with government money, who predicted the whole thing would collapse within months. But slowly, against everyone's expectations, including her own, it started working. The children began to change. Not overnight, not dramatically, but in small ways that accumulated into something significant. Wyatt stopped carrying the revolver everywhere. He still kept it hidden under his bed, but he didn't need it in his hand constantly anymore. Elsie started smiling occasionally, real smiles that reached her eyes instead of the fake ones she'd used for self-protection. Thomas built a small workshop where he repaired things for other children, and occasionally for townspeople who'd come asking for help. Ruth stopped hoarding food in her pockets. Daniel's cough gradually improved until some days he could run around without wheezing. And one morning in late March, Evelyn woke up and realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd thought about running away. This was home now, broken and imperfect and full of damaged people trying to figure out how to be whole again. But home. The marshal returned on the first clear day of April, when snow was finally melting into mud and the first green shoots were appearing in the frozen ground. Evelyn met him at the church door, nervous despite 3 months of preparation. He walked through slowly, inspecting everything. The sleeping areas with proper beds and clean linens, the kitchen with organized supplies and a meal schedule posted on the wall, the schoolroom where a retired teacher from town had started giving lessons 3 days a week, the medical station, the workshop, the common area where children gathered in the evenings. He interviewed several children privately, asking about food, treatment, safety, education. Then he sat down with Evelyn in the small office she'd claimed for administrative work. "I'm impressed," he said. "Honestly, didn't think you'd pull it off." "Neither did I. You've got some challenges ahead. Funding's going to be an ongoing issue. Some of these kids have serious problems that need more help than you can provide. And you're going to need more staff eventually. One person can't do everything forever." "I know. But you've built something real here. These children are fed, safe, and starting to heal." He pulled out papers from his satchel. "The territorial government is approving the establishment as an official orphan home. You're legally recognized now, which means you can receive ongoing funding, accept new children, and make placement decisions." Evelyn felt something unclench that she hadn't realized was still tight with worry. "There's one more thing," the marshal said. "Several of the children are old enough that they don't legally need to be in an orphanage. Wyatt Boone, Elsie Patterson, a few others. They can leave if they want, find work, start their own lives." "I know. Have you talked to them about it?" "Not directly. Figured I'd let them decide when they're ready." "And if they all decide to leave? If you end up with just the young ones who can't survive on their own?" Evelyn thought about that. About the possibility that Wyatt and Elsie and the others might choose freedom over the structure she'd built. About how much it would hurt to watch them go, even though letting them choose was the whole point. "Then I deal with it," she said. "They stayed this long because they had to. If they stay now, it should be because they want to. That's how family works. People stay because they choose to, not because they're trapped." The marshal nodded approvingly. "You're learning." After he left, Evelyn called a meeting in the common area. All 27 children gathered, ranging from 3-year-old Ruth to 15-year-old Wyatt. "The marshal approved us," Evelyn announced. "We're official now, a real orphan home with legal recognition and everything." Cheers erupted from the younger children. The older ones looked more cautious. Understanding this came with implications. "But that means some things are going to change," Evelyn continued. "We're going to have more structure, regular school hours, assigned chores, rules that actually get enforced, and anyone who's old enough to leave can make that choice now without guilt or pressure." Silence. Then Wyatt raised his hand. "What happens if we want to stay but not as orphans? If we want to help run things instead of just being kids who need taking care of?" Evelyn hadn't expected that question. "What are you asking?" "I'm asking if there's a way to be part of this place without being charity cases. Thomas and Elsie and me, we're not little kids anymore. We don't need someone tucking us in at night, but we also don't want to just leave and never come back." He looked around at the other faces. "This is our home too. We built it. We should have a say in how it runs." Several other older children nodded agreement. Evelyn looked at Morrison, who'd been standing quietly in the corner. He shrugged, a small smile on his face. "I think that's a hell of an idea," Morrison said. "You could use staff, assistants, people who know these kids and understand what they've been through." "They're children," Evelyn protested. "They're survivors, big difference." Morrison looked at Wyatt. "You serious about this? About staying and working instead of leaving?" "I don't know how to do anything else," Wyatt said honestly. "And someone's got to make sure Miss Mercer doesn't work herself to death trying to do everything alone." "I'm not dying," Evelyn said. "Not yet. But you were up till midnight 3 nights this week doing paperwork, and I heard you crying last Tuesday when you thought everyone was asleep." Evelyn felt her face flush. "I wasn't—" "You were, and that's okay. This is hard work, and it makes sense that it hurts sometimes." Wyatt's voice was surprisingly gentle. "But you don't have to do it alone anymore. That's what you taught us, remember? Nobody survives alone out here." Evelyn looked at all the faces watching her. Some young, some not so young, all of them shaped by trauma and survival and the strange family they'd built together. "Fine," she said. "Anyone who wants to can stay on as staff. We'll figure out the details later. But that means you follow the same rules as me, including the part where you actually sleep instead of staying up all night worrying." "Deal," several voices answered at once. The next year was better than the first months, but not by much. They established routines, school in the mornings, work in the afternoons, free time in the evenings. The children who stayed on as staff took on real responsibilities. Wyatt managed the older boys and handled discipline issues. Elsie ran the medical station and coordinated with Doc Ferris. Thomas maintained the building and taught basic repair skills to younger children. New children arrived periodically. Some were orphaned by disease or accidents. Others had been abandoned by families too poor to feed them. Each one came with their own trauma and needs, and each one had to be integrated into the community carefully. It didn't always work. Some kids ran away. A few had to be transferred to other facilities that could handle more serious behavioral or medical issues. One teenage boy threatened Evelyn with a knife before Wyatt managed to talk him down. And even then, the boy left the next day, disappearing into the frontier before anyone could stop him. But more often, it did work. Children who arrived hollow-eyed and feral slowly became part of the community. They learned they didn't have to fight for every meal. They discovered that adults could be trustworthy. They started believing in futures that extended past the next day. The town's relationship with the orphan home evolved too. Some people remained hostile, seeing the children as drains on resources. But more townspeople started volunteering, teaching skills, donating supplies, offering jobs to older kids who were ready for paid work. Morrison proved surprisingly good at managing Red Hollow. He organized fairly, listened to complaints, and slowly started rebuilding the town's reputation. New families moved in as word spread that the corruption was gone. Businesses reopened. The mine started limited operations again with new safety protocols. Red Hollow was healing. Slowly. Like the children. 2 years after Evelyn arrived, on a cold November evening that reminded her of that first night, she stood outside what had officially been renamed Mercer House and took inventory of everything that had changed. The building had been expanded with a new wing for additional sleeping quarters. The grounds included a vegetable garden, a chicken coop, and a small workshop. The church's original bell had been repaired and now rang every evening at dinner time, calling children home. 23 children currently lived in Mercer House, ages ranging from 4 to 14. 7 others had aged out or moved on to other situations but still visited regularly. Wyatt was 17 now, working part-time at the livery stable while still helping manage the house. Elsie had started apprenticing with Doc Ferris officially, learning real medicine to go with her natural talent for healing. It wasn't perfect. Money was still tight. Some children still had nightmares. Conflict still erupted. The work was still exhausting, but they'd survived. And more than that, they'd built something that mattered. Wyatt found her standing there in the cold, lost in thought. "You getting nostalgic?" he asked. "Maybe a little. Remember when this place was just a burned-out shed and a bunch of terrified kids? Every day? We've come a long way." "You've come a long way. I'm just trying to keep up." He laughed. "You're a terrible liar, Miss Mercer." "I know." They stood together watching lights glow from the windows where children were finishing homework or playing games or getting ready for bed. "Do you ever regret it?" Wyatt asked. "Staying here? Giving up whatever life you might have had somewhere else?" Evelyn thought about Kansas City, about her husband's grave and her daughter's smaller one beside it, about the years of drifting and grief and emptiness that had defined her life before Red Hollow. "No," she said honestly. "This is exactly where I'm supposed to be. Even though it's hard? Especially because it's hard. Easy things don't change you. Hard things make you figure out who you actually are underneath all the fear and grief." "And who are you?" "I'm still figuring that out, but I think I'm someone who's better at taking care of people than I am at taking care of myself. And I think I'm okay with that." Wyatt nodded slowly. "Sarah would be proud of you, your daughter." "Maybe, or maybe she'd think I'm crazy for taking on this much responsibility." Evelyn smiled slightly. "But I'd like to think she'd understand why. That sometimes the best way to honor people you've lost is to protect people you can still save." The dinner bell rang, echoing across the yard. Children started emerging from various activities, heading toward the dining hall where Elsie and some of the older kids had prepared the meal. "Come on," Wyatt said. "If we're late, Ruth will eat all the bread before we get any." "That kid has a problem. She was starving for most of her life. Give her another year before you judge her bread obsession." They walked inside together, into warmth and noise, and the controlled chaos of 23 children trying to eat dinner at the same time. It was messy. It was loud. It was absolutely nothing like the quiet, orderly life Evelyn had once imagined for herself. It was perfect. Years later, when travelers passed through Red Hollow and asked about the large stone building on the east side of town, Locals told them about Mercer House with a mix of pride and reverence. They told about the winter of 1887, when a woman with nothing but cooking skills and stubborn determination fought an entire corrupt administration to protect children everyone else had abandoned. They told about the fire that nearly killed them all and the rebuilt home that rose from those ashes. They told about the children who'd survived impossible circumstances and grew into adults who made the frontier a better place. But the story that stuck with people, the one that got repeated around campfires and dinner tables, was simpler than all of that. It was about the first meal. That November evening when Evelyn Mercer cooked potatoes and cornmeal over a barrel fire and shared it with 3 hungry children who'd forgotten what kindness looked like. Because that's where everything actually started. Not with grand plans or noble intentions, but with one person deciding that hunger mattered more than safety, that children deserved protection even when it was dangerous to provide it, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop walking past suffering and actually do something about it. The frontier was a hard place that killed weak things quickly, but it also created space for people to become whoever they needed to be. Evelyn Mercer arrived in Red Hollow as a broken woman running from her past. She became someone who built futures for children who'd lost theirs, and in doing so, she discovered something that all those years of grief had hidden from her. That love doesn't actually die when people do. It transforms. It finds new shapes and new expressions. It becomes the reason you feed hungry children even when you're hungry yourself. The reason you fight authority when authority is wrong. The reason you stay when running would be easier. The reason you build homes for people who've lost theirs. Love survives everything, even death, because love isn't about the people you've lost. It's about what you do with the empty space they left behind. You can fill it with bitterness and grief and isolation, or you can fill it with purpose and connection and the fierce determination to make sure others don't suffer the same losses you did. Evelyn chose the second path, and 27 children survived because of that choice, which means her daughter Sarah saved lives even though she'd been dead for 5 years. That's how love works when you let it transform instead of trying to preserve it exactly as it was. It becomes bigger than one person. It becomes the reason you get up every morning even when you're exhausted. It becomes the foundation for families built from strangers who chose each other instead of being forced together by blood. It becomes the thing that survives the winter. Every winter. Forever. On Evelyn's last day, decades later, surrounded by children and grandchildren and the extended family that Mercer House had become, she was asked if she had any regrets. She thought about that question carefully, about all the things she'd lost and all the things she'd built. About Sarah, buried in Kansas City under a stone marker Evelyn hadn't visited in 40 years. About the children she'd saved and the ones she couldn't save and the difference between the two. About the life she might have lived if she'd kept running instead of staying to fight. "No regrets," she said finally. "I did what I came here to do." "Which was what?" someone asked. Evelyn smiled. "I stopped being the person who walked away, and I became the person who stayed." She died that night in her sleep, warm and safe in the home she'd built, surrounded by people who loved her because she'd loved them first even when it was hard. The funeral drew people from 3 territories: former orphans who'd become ranchers, teachers, doctors, merchants, townspeople whose children had been saved by the medical clinic Elsie established, travelers who'd heard the stories and wanted to pay respects to the legend. And at the front of the crowd, now a man in his 60s with gray in his beard and grandchildren of his own, stood Wyatt Boone. He gave the eulogy. It was short and honest and full of the kind of truth Evelyn would have appreciated. "She wasn't perfect," he said. "She made mistakes. She was stubborn and reckless, and sometimes her plans were terrible. But she showed up when it mattered, and she stayed when staying was hard. And because of that, dozens of children who should have died in 1887 lived to have families of their own. That's not a small thing. That's everything." They buried her in Red Hollow Cemetery, next to Morrison and Doc Ferris, and all the others who'd helped build something that lasted. The headstone was simple. Evelyn Mercer, 1853 to 1931. She fed the hungry. And every winter after that, when snow buried the frontier and the wind screamed across the plains, light still glowed warm from Mercer House's windows, while children gathered around long wooden tables crowded with steaming bowls of food, laughter, and the kind of safety most of them had once believed existed only in dreams. Because some things survive winter, some things survive everything. Love, family, home, and the memory of a woman who proved that one person refusing to walk away can change the world for dozens of others. That's the lesson Red Hollow learned. That's the story they told. And that's why Mercer House still stands today, more than a century later, still feeding hungry children, still providing shelter, still proving that sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is simply refuse to let people suffer when you have the power to help. The frontier doesn't exist anymore, but the children still do. And someone still needs to feed them.